Okay, we are live. We're a little bit early, which is okay. Let me throw out all of the social media jazz so I can remember to do this week. That would be cool. So, right after the stream yesterday, which was Sunday, which was the learning game stream for GMT's U.S. Civil War, I scheduled this stream and didn't notice that in opposition to the way YouTube almost always does it otherwise, it like defaults to the following day. It defaulted to yesterday. So it was like a posting that this would be happening last night, which was never intended to be correct. So anybody who tuned in last night, I do apologize for that inconvenience. I'm going to claim that I was super wiped out yesterday after spending literally the whole day up until the point where I started streaming at 4:30 building prefab furniture. So this is going to squeak, isn't it? And it's going to be irritating to all concerned. This is my 2mm clipper, and it is going to need... You know what? It's pretty bad right here, too. First of all, thanks everybody for stopping in. This is this week's counter clipping stream. We are clipping Sicily, Triumph, and Folly, and we are drinking... I'll talk about this a little bit, because this is local. This is... Middle West Spirits is the name of the distillery. It's a local Columbus, Ohio distillery. I'm not sure they're selling their stuff as Ohio anymore. They may be selling it as Middle West Spirits now. This is their like regular whiskey made from 100% Ohio wheat, which is why it is fairly interesting. It is bottled at 46%, which is, in my opinion, the correct concentration to bottle at. It strikes the best balance between flavor and keeping the burn under control. I have not put water in this. It is just neat. So that is what we are drinking this evening. And I picked this game because I have too many half-punched OCS games. I have about 3 half-punched OCS games. So I want to get this... I will get this done tonight. And then we can have one less half-punched OCS game. And I think the last of those will be... Well, long story. The last of those should be Baltic Gap. But I'm still going through... The inspiration for why we picked this topic for tonight is how to organize war games. Is the fact that I am currently beating my head against the Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 and Case Blue thing that made its way to my door. It came, and I've talked about this before, so both games I got for a very good price. I got both Case Blue and Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2. Everything was mixed together in about 40 counter trays. So it's impossible to tell if it's complete. It's tough to say. I am quite certain that there's at least 1 and possibly 2 complete versions of Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 in there. I'm not convinced there's a complete set of Case Blue in there yet, but we'll see. Because it's so many counter trays, I'm slowly bleeding the extras counter trays off as I sort through stuff. It's been a chore to confirm, and I'll talk. I guess I can do that now. Let me load this up, and I'll show you my method of confirming this, which is probably not the fastest or most efficient way. I mean, the fastest way is just to count the pieces, right? That's not what I'm doing, because it's impossible for me to do that, because there's like 2.4 copies of Guderian's Blitzkrieg and maybe 0.95 copies of Case Blue in here, so I totally can't confirm it just by counting pieces. So what I got here is downloaded scans, the counter sheets, in this case GB2, from BGG. If you got better scans, you use those instead, but these are fine for this. And then I literally go through it and put a little green check mark on each piece that I have verified is there. I am now going through... I have verified that there is at least 1 complete set of GB2 2011 Soviet pieces. And I suspect there's probably at least 2 But yeah, so I'll get to that in a second. The I'm pretty sure there's a whole second set of Soviets as well, but I didn't start counting them that way until I started the Axis units. So I'm actually counting out a second set, and the second set has been completely complete so far, with the possible exception of this one errata counter that came somewhere. I'm not sure where. I have only found one of those, but there's no guarantee it's not lurking around. So more aren't lurking around somewhere. But there are some of these like formations. There's as many as 4 copies of some of these multi-unit formations, so I have no idea what's going on. We just had like a big ice storm here that it really kind of sucks outside right now. So I'm not sure. It was supposed to snow more than it felt like it did to me, and I was out earlier. But the weather seems pretty bad. So don't be absolutely stunned if I lose power here, in which case, obviously, the stream will come to an abrupt and crashing halt. The other new thing that is new as of... Let me get back to my beautiful face. That is new as of tonight is this light, which I have obtained relatively recently, thanks to the Patreon supporters. It is a ring light that is supposed to be good for like teleconferencing and stuff. And the problem with it for me is I got to position it exactly right because I wear glasses, and if I tilt up, you'll see the big ring light shining off my glasses. So it's got to be positioned exactly correctly. But I do feel like the picture quality, and I'll do comparisons after the stream tomorrow with older streams, but this should improve the visual quality of this particular format of videos. So the combined... Grumpy Gamer mentions that there's on BGG there's a combined storage solution for GB for Guderian Splitscreek and Case Blue. I am using that as a basis. My goal, and we'll talk about this, is to get everything in 6 trays. Now, I don't know that I'll be able to do that, but that's the goal. And I am fairly positive at this point that I will be able to get GB2 into 3 trays. There are 7 GB2 counter sheets, okay? The rule of thumb is that 2 counter sheets, and we're talking about standard counter trays here. There's many other solutions besides standard counter trays, but that's what I'm using for this, in an attempt to get everything back in the actual, the 2 actual boxes. The idea here is to get... Actually, let me start with the trays themselves, because we've got 3 common box sizes that we have to deal with in war games nowadays. Now, there's some oddballs like the SPI trays and the old 1-inch boxes, which SPI used pretty commonly, but even GMT has released some games in 1-inch boxes over the years. However, that's relatively unusual nowadays, at least for games that you're going to have a problem fitting back in that 1-inch box. So the 3 common box sizes that we see today are, and I'm going to get an older one here because it's the one we're looking at right now, is the 1.5-inch size like we have with Sicily, Triumph, and Folly. If you measure this, you're gonna see it's 1.5 inches. Now, assuming there's no cards or bulky components of any other kind, you're going to find that 1 counter tray comfortably fits in this sized box. There's the 2-inch box, which we've all seen, right? Every other game on this shelf, which I covered all up. But like, say, well, you might not be able to see them. But I've got the GMT Next War games. Those are in the standard 2-inch boxes. Again, assuming that the amount of other components is reasonable and there's no cards or anything like that, you can comfortably get 2 counter trays in there. If you don't mind it bulging, I don't like it to bulge, but you can get more than that. And then the big 3-inch boxes tend to be larger games, so I tend to comfortably, and this varies by game, I tend to be able to comfortably get 3 standard size counter trays in a 3-inch box. So that's another Grumpy Gamer also mentions, and this is something. It's a good point. And OCS, because I have a lot of OCS games at this point, and we play a lot of OCS games. I do not put the standard series markers into the game boxes. They go in their own tray, and at this point, I have a million extra marker sheets. And that's just the way it is. So. That is a solution I don't like. I'd like to be able to just put everything in the box. The one exception to that for OCS is the one that we clipped last week, which was Reluctant Enemies, where I kind of wanted it because it's a small, portable, here's how you play OCS type of thing. I wanted to be able to put absolutely everything needed in one box. So absolutely everything, including the markers, is in that box. But otherwise, I don't put the markers in. The only markers I put in are like the game-specific markers, like the turn marker and Sicily. I think Sicily 2 as well, but Sicily 1 here has port markers for all the ports, so you can track the port damage on a track, an on-map track for each port. So I did the Allied units like a year ago. It actually probably was about a year ago. I actually got this for a song. I think I paid about $35 for it. It normally goes way, way higher, but it was not complete. But what was in there were the maps and the counters. Actually, the marker sheets weren't in there, but again, as I just mentioned, who cares? I have those. I can easily download the rules and all that other stuff. And you can fit it all in this box as long as you offload your markers into your standard markers into some other storage solution. The rule of thumb, my rule of thumb is that I can comfortably get 2 sheets of counters. These are standard half-inch counters, 280 counters per sheet. I can almost always get 2 of those very comfortably into one counter tray. I can almost always get 3 counter trays in, but it might be a bit tight. 3 sheets into one counter tray, but it might be a bit tight. And it's difficult when you start looking at getting 4 sheets of counters into one counter tray. Then that becomes an extremely densely packed counter tray. And it's almost never a good solution at that point. You can always go with baggies, but certainly with OCS, I don't like baggies in most cases. So I actually have played both. Let me talk about OCS Sicily because it's kind of an oddball case in that they have done 2 really quite different games on the topic of Sicily in OCS. So the first one was Sicily Triumph and Folly. It is a 2-map game. The map scale is, as I recall, 2.5 miles per hex. And most of the units that I am currently looking at right now are battalions on the German side, and that's really true of the the Allied side as well. It's one of the few OCS games that I've seen where Burma might be another example of this, where I haven't really looked at it that closely, where they break leg units up into multi-unit formations like infantry divisions and stuff like that. That's very unusual. Sicily 2 does not do that. So at some point after Sicily Triumph and Folly was published, they decided on a uniform west front scale, which is 3.5 miles per hex instead of 2.5 miles per hex. So this is the scale that Beyond the Rhine is at, and I believe it's the scale that Blitzkrieg Legend is at too, and it is also the scale at which Cross-Channel Attack, which was the Normandy game that's in development, will be at. So they redid Sicily 2 as what turned out to be a one-map game. That is Sicily 2. I've played both games. I like both games. Both games are sufficiently different that I wanted both of them. But Sicily Triumph and Folly, which I will probably call Sicily 1 at some point, is relatively hard to get. I mean, you can get it if you want to pay $200 for it, but I think that's crazy, and I'm not doing that. So I managed to get a copy of this off the sale table at Compass Expo last year, actually, for, like I said, like $30 or $35 or something like that. Wasn't complete, but I don't care. I'm not buying it as a collector's piece. I have played this before and enjoyed it tremendously, and I will play it again at some point. So, obviously, we have a lot of solutions for counter storage. And counter storage tends to be the big difficulty with war, text and counter war games, obviously. Sometimes it is impacted by the other problem, which is card storage for games in which there are cards. And that is why sometimes for card-driven games that are in 2-inch boxes, I end up putting the counters in those dollar store trays, which I actually stopped at Dollar Tree today, which is like every Dollar Tree has those little plastic trays for $1, except our Dollar Tree over here, where I have never seen them. So they are pretty nice. They're about the same height as a standard counter tray. I think they're just a little bit fatter, but by like a millimeter. And they're pretty nice for $1 a piece. And when I go to Dollar Tree, I will typically clean Dollar Tree out of them, which typically means that I get about 12. Do I have these mixed up? I totally do. I've never seen more than that at Dollar Tree. Mo at Mo's Game Table, I think, has done a video on them. I have not managed to keep them around long enough to do a video on them. But I should do that. Now, the nice thing about those is that they are just about half the size of a counter tray. So they will fit comfortably in a game box alongside a deck of cards. So for quite a while, say Empire of the Sun was stored that way, because it's got 2 huge decks of cards as well as about a counter sheet and a half or something like that. Now, the current edition, or the last edition, it's not current anymore, it's out of print, of Empire of the Sun was in a 3-inch box, which eliminates that problem. So I have now counter trays, a counter tray, and then deck boxes for the decks. And I've been known to make tuck boxes for cards as well. I haven't done that lately. When I start doing that again, I will probably do a video on how I do it. I do use Inkscape to do it. And on my own label printer, or not, it's a laser printer, I should say, I can print pretty heavy cardstock, heavy enough for me to be comfortable printing that type of stuff. ASL is the most obvious example of a game that is flatly impossible to store in the game boxes. If you have everything, or even a close approximation to everything, it's just not possible. I've seen people do it, but those are people who only have like 3 things for ASL. You can get all the Beyond Valor counters in the Beyond Valor box and all the Yanks counters in the Yanks box, but sooner or later it's going to blow one of those boxes apart. So I use, for ASL, I use these container store trays. These are the big ones. These are now $6 a piece, and they are 32 compartment trays. And they have latches on the front, and I like them. They come in about 4 different sizes. These are the biggest ones. The other nice thing is they stack up very nicely in these IKEA cube units. And I would tell you how many of those I need for ASL, except that my organization is not done. But all the nationalities except the Americans are in 2 boxes, and then the Americans are in 3 because of those Pacific units that I just couldn't squeeze in a way that I was satisfied with. And it's going to be like 30 boxes anyway, so it's not like saving 1 box would be that big a deal. Now, Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2, which is the big thing that I'm working on, I am absolutely confident, and we'll see how close to correct I am, that I can get everything in there into 3 trays relatively comfortably. Organized for maximum ease, maybe not, but I'm pretty comfortable with that. Now, Case Blue has something like 9 counter sheets of units, and I am not positive I'm going to be able to get that into 3 trays. It might be 4 trays. I suspect that it will be. But we'll see. It's also like the biggest game in the series, and while it's not the biggest game I have, it's pretty far from the biggest game I have, actually, but it's pretty... is it too bright? Is the lighting too bright? Let me see if I can turn this down a little bit. All right, let me know if it's too bright, because this is as low as it goes. What I could do is back it off a little bit and see if that helps. So let's catch up to the chat. H Tuna Asks if I have to be careful with the clipper. Can I really mess up a counter? So on this, the big difference between the standard clipper and the deluxe clipper is that the deluxe clipper is really impossible to mutilate a counter, just because of the way the guides are designed. The standard clipper is not that hard to do it, but that is a Bruce Springsteen song, by the way. Manfred Mann, the Manfred Mann version, which is the better version, is a cover. Manfred Mann did do prog albums, by the way. A lot of people have... You can... Let me see if I can do it on purpose. I have a blank counter here. So if this is not... If the counter does not rest in there quite straight, what you can get is what's called a... That was not... That did it a little bit. I don't know how well you can see that. That's not exactly a completely clean corner. It will, instead of taking a nice round section off the corner, it'll take a smaller round section off the corner and a little bit of flat section off the side. And it's not that big a deal normally, but I don't want to say that you can't mess up a counter in a very undesirable way using it. But if you are careful, you will not do that. A lot of people, I don't know about most, some people will actually use it upside down so that you can look in the slot and see that the counter is in there square, okay? There's a little bit of rock. You can rock this counter just a little bit in this style of clipper if you want. Now, I don't do it upside down. That this could be simply that I have clipped probably 30,000 counters with this particular clipper. So all I do is I rest the counter against one of the rails, the bottom rail, and I slide it straight into the corner. And that's it. And I put basically no pressure on the counter. And I can tell if the clipper is biting too much. Yeah, let me turn it off. Well, if nothing else, if it doesn't help the stream, it certainly helps my lighting situation here on the desk for counters. So the ring light is going to be helpful to me one way or the other. It did look a little glary, but I'm looking at the view on OBS, which is a little tiny, smaller than an index card piece of screen real estate, so it's hard for me to tell. So if it looks crap... Okay, I hope that fixed it. I got an error message out of OBS, which is not typical. So hopefully we are back. Very good. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. I didn't lose power. It just OBS, and I've had OBS do this a couple of times. I got a message that said encoder overloaded. I will have to troubleshoot that at a later time, but in the meantime, we should be back with good quality now. So again, sorry about that. I don't know if it's still snowing here, but I suspect that it is. Let me get my screens all reorganized here, because I had this set up in a specific way so that I can share a screen if I want to share a screen, which we might get back to. So let's... check up on the stream. Did I miss anything? Other than the fact that the stream shut down. Apparently not. By the way, I partially shaved because the cat ran across, or one cat ran across my face last night. And I got I don't know if you can see it on stream here, but I got a fairly decent gash on my chin, and I had to get in there and decontaminate it, so I needed to buzz it down. So, let's go to the bottom. Okay, we're drinking this Ohio 100% Ohio wheat whiskey. It's pretty good if you like wheat whiskey. I guess I'll mention... well, I'll talk about that later. I'm going to talk about some RPG type stuff later on. Let's say everything that we need to say about at least counter storage. Brant over at the Armchair Dragoons asked, when I said I was doing a stream about organizing war games, asked whether I was talking about how to organize your war games in the box or how to organize people to play war games. That's a great topic, too, that I think we will touch on later on. There are some video. This is on video. If you want to peruse old videos on the channel of me with some, let's say, rather extreme sideburns. So, and those will probably make an appearance again at some point, but I have no specific timetable. Right now, I'm kind of just being lazy about it more than anything else. All right, so we're going to have to try to get Baltic Gap, which I believe is 3 counter sheets, also into 1 counter tray, and that's going to be fairly difficult. Blitzkrieg Legend is in a 2-inch box. Hungarian Rhapsody is in a 2-inch box. I think Hungarian Rhapsody has 3 sheets of units. I think that sounds correct. It might only be 2. I haven't clipped mine yet, so... Oh, so, I mean, storing miniatures is... I mean, you really do need dedicated miniatures storage solutions for storing miniatures, unless you just have an unlimited amount of shelf space to put tiny things. I store miniatures. I do have some miniatures that I've had for years in those flat Chessex miniatures boxes. I think I have 3 of them. They're adequate, and I don't need any more, so because I'm not doing more miniatures. So, all right, that is all of the Axis, or all the German multi-unit formations. So, I'm very happy with... The 28s still fit in the Chessex trays, I tell you that. But you can get those like huge army storage boxes now, and I mean, if I had a lot of miniatures, that's what I would want. So since some folks have brought up gaming online, Wargaming Online is, I think, reasonably agreeable. Is it as good as playing in person? No, but, I don't think it's too bad. And there are some games, certainly bigger games, where it is maybe even preferable, because it potentially saves you a lot of setup and teardown time, and you don't have to worry about leaving something, big thing set up in your basement for 2 years. So that's a thing. I've always found RPGs to be very easy to organize, because your stuff is in a binder or something like that. I have exceptions to that, but everything else just goes on a shelf, right? Or in a box in the closet, as the case may be. Whereas war games, I've always found that there are some war games that are very challenging. So one of the things that rolled in, as thanks to the multi-man, we found it in the warehouse sale, was SCS Bastogne. There'll be an unboxing video of that coming along at some point. I'm in no hurry because the game's 20 years old. But that's a very nice game, but it's one map, it's 1 counter sheet, right? A single counter tray feels like overkill for that game, to be honest. I can easily get... that's actually one reason why I stopped at Dollar Tree today, was I think one of those half little counter trays from Dollar Tree would be perfect for that game. I'll end up using a GMT counter tray, what we always call GMT counter trays, but I will point out that these same style of counter trays that we all call GMT counter trays, because GMT is the current manufacturer, these are based on the original counter trays from the gamers. They were, and I bought like 20 of those at an Origins one year directly from them, and that stack of counter trays lasted me for like 15 years. I did not run out until I started getting back into war games, which means I got like my war games that I still had out of the closet and started organizing them obsessively. At one point, I was really, really close to being caught up on games being punched and organized. And now, let's say that's no longer the case. Now, there are some games that I have no hope of getting on a table locally, which leaves me with options like playing them at a large convention or playing them at online on Vassal, right? And I damned if I can think of the specific game I was thinking of. There will be an unboxing video of Time for Trumpets, by the way, and I have ordered, which is a buddy unboxing, but I have ordered it as well. So it is a very nice looking product. I got my stuff from that MMP sale very quickly. But I got in on it like that morning, so that might be why. And I also didn't order that much stuff. I wish I could have ordered I wish I could have ordered an extra copy of Baltic Gap, actually. Matt Taylor, I do have a How to Vassal video on the channel, so search for that and you will find it. Most people have, well, the people who have talked to me about it say they have found it useful. So that is my understanding of MMP's, the Panzer Blitz thing. I'm a little confused, to be honest, because there's Panzer Blitz Hill of Death, there's Panzer Blitz Carentan, and then there's that new Panzer Blitz that Gina Willis, I think, is working on. I might have the designer's name wrong. And I am not sure if any of those are the same game as the original Panzer Blitz. I did get Festung Budapest. It was absolutely a last chance to obtain that product. And it is large. It's nine counter sheets and 4 maps, although there is no 4-map campaign game in it. The campaign games are 2 maps, but there are 4 maps. So I think we're back to good stream health here now. I have it positioned in the window so I can see the stream health, just in case it decides it's going to take another dump. So Jim L. Asks how to remove the counters from the sprues. In most cases, I just punch them out. I just punch them out by hand. I did that with this right before the stream started. I took my 1 counter sheet of Sicily Triumphant Folly and tore them out. If you're careful with it, you shouldn't have any problems, as long as the die cutting is good. There are many, many, many examples of games where the die cutting isn't as good, or there are center nibs, in which case you don't want to just tear them because those center nibs are hard to get rid of. In that case, I use a utility knife, one of these type of things, to remove them from the sheets. I have also seen people use scissors to do that. Or rotary cutters. I have slipped with both the rotary cutter and the scissors, and I'd prefer not to do that. I am more accurate with the utility knife. That might just be Sharon Boyd. Sorry about that. Thank you, Peter. For that clarification. So Peter Bartlett, who is the multimedia guru over at Multiman Publishing, mentions that Sharon Boyd is the developer for the latest Panzer Blitz, which is, I believe, called Panzer Blitz East Front. And she was had it set up and running at Winter Offensive last year as well. Hill of Death is different from the original Panzer Blitz. Carentan is a scenario for the Hill of Death rules, and the new East Front that Gina is working on is Hill of Death, but with some retooling. Now, ASL played on Vassal is kind of its own universe. Vassal many people might not know this now, but Vassal was originally designed to run ASL. That's what it's started standing for, was VASL, Virtual ASL. It's got kind of its own kit that you have to use to make it work, and it has some extra steps because you have to like say, oh, I'm going to pull these boards and arrange them in this way, and there's a little bit of extra learning curve involved in doing ASL over Vassal. That said, most of the rest of it is pretty much identical to regular Vassal. It is, in fact, a little clunky. You do get used to it, though. I mean, it's not so clunky that you cannot become accustomed to it to the degree that you will become comfortable doing it. Smart board. Is the smart board that sort of whiteboard type thing that hangs on the wall and you can write on? Because that sounds pretty sweet, if so. Now, I have, Slow Biscuit mentions that he can't get past the zoomed-in look. I have a 42-inch, and this was mentioned, and I'm pretty sure somebody was being a wise guy in the comments about it. I'm using Vassal on a 42-inch 4K TV as a monitor. It is much cheaper to buy a 4K TV in this size than it is to buy a monitor in this size. It won't be as good for video games, but Vassal is not really a video game and doesn't have the same demands as video games. It's more like it has the same demands as Excel. And I have found that, well, it doesn't eliminate the sort of tunnel vision type effect that you do have in Vassal. That is like a legitimate beef. It really, really helps to eliminate it. So I will be playing on my giant-ass TV from this point forward. Stigler also mentions that, and he's absolutely right about this, that Vassal, how good an experience you have is somewhat dependent on the quality of the module, and because every module, almost every module, is done by some volunteer somewhere, there is wide variation in terms of module quality. Some modules are, frankly, not playable, and the resulting thing is not in a playable state. Most modules, however, are at least usable, even if they are not awesome. They're certainly very, very competent Vassal module authors floating around. Francisco Calamares, who did the Vassal module for Empire of the Sun and the Vassal module for Hot Dry Season, has produced consistently good work in terms of Vassal modules. Joel Toppin, who does a lot of the Vassal modules for GMT, has produced really good modules. You do have to go a little bit out of your way to see who made the module, though, and it might not be obvious. And then, there's like those nameless modules that for the old SPI games and stuff like that. I have no idea who made most of those things. So, and for a while it was hush-hush that those even existed, right? Because they were technically not desired. Well, not technically. They were Decision Games didn't want you to have them. But nevertheless, they were out there. And if you knew where to go get them, you could go get them. There are multiple sources. Slow Biscuit, for Battle for Normandy specifically, that scrolling is a significant problem because there are holding boxes on the map that should be on screens that you can open, and so you have to scroll to, for example, every time you take a loss, you have to scroll over to the replacement tracker track that's on the map. It makes playing Battle for Normandy a giant pain in the junk. So I absolutely do agree with that. But that's module design, right? You could always put a button up there that says Deadpool and replacements or whatever, and you click that button, move your tracking marker, and that's it. Stigler is another. This Stigler is also another person well known for his acumen in building vassal modules. And if there are any problems with his modules, you can yell at him, and he fixes it. It's awesome. I mean, I will always agree that it's better to play face-to-face, but some people don't have the ability to do that. For whatever reason, right? There are a variety of things that keep people from playing face-to-face. The most common of which is probably, the idea that, hey, there's nobody near me that plays war games, which is probably not true, but might be true in some cases if you live up in Alaska or someplace like that. I don't know that I had a problem with Space Corp on Vassal, but I don't think I ever played Space... I looked at the module, but I didn't try to play it. I played Space Corp Solitaire, just with the physical pieces. It's a nice little Euro with a nice theme. We're about halfway... Yeah, I think so. We're about halfway through the counter sheet at this point. And we are only more than 36 minutes technically, but we're going till at least 10 p.m. tonight. So 10 p.m. Eastern. Now see, I actually clipped a little bit of the side here. Let's see if I can show you that. I think it would be hard to this degree. It would be hard to see. See if I can get it to focus. This corner sticking up is the one. It's focused on my enormous helicopter landing pad of a forehead rather than on the counter. Something that this webcam, and it is a webcam, is not particularly good at. Daniel, the answer to your question, he asks if I need extensive programming knowledge to create vassal mods. No. And there is good support for it on the Vassal site. There's a big manual on how to create Vassal modules. Joel Toppin has also done a how-to video series on how to create Vassal modules. Doing the module itself is not that difficult. It certainly is a leg up on Vassal module creation if you can do light Java programming, but I don't think it's really necessary. That said, it's also a giant pain in the nuts. If you don't have already separated images of the counters. I started doing a Vassal module for decision game Storm of Steel. Never got done with the counters because it turned out I didn't have a quality scan of the counters. The ones I found online looked terrible, and so it was actually faster. And a scan of the whole counter sheet that you then extract individual counter images was actually more work than me setting up a template in Inkscape to recreate the counters from scratch. That may not be true with all games, but it was true of that particular game. So, yeah, so Stigler mentions Joel's video series again. I do. If you are interested in how to create Vassal modules, he is the first place I would go. I would start with Joel's videos and then go to the documentation. Because, it's not the most user-friendly documentation on the planet, let's face it. Do I enjoy Vassal soloing? I enjoyed Vassal soloing enough to play a campaign game of the Battle for Normandy. So, yeah, I mean, it can work. It can work fine. It's especially appealing for bigger games that I don't necessarily have the space to set up here at home, right? At my buddy's place where we play OCS, he's got 2 4x8 tables. I could set up anything. I could set up Case Blue, no problem, on his rig. I can't, I got enough room to set up one physical map here. Could I arrange a bigger play area? Yes, but not easily. And so it makes playing those larger games on Vassal, even if whether it's solitaire or not, very appealing. It also, depending on the module, some modules, many modules, and all good modules will have the setups for the scenarios in the module, so you don't have to open it up and manually set it up. Now, even if you have to do that, you theoretically only have to do that once, right? Because then you can save it as like a campaign game start save. Sicily, Triumph, and Folly, not Sicily 2, is what is being clipped. So, I was going to try to hang this off of here, but it's a bit fiddly. But I guess that's not too bad. I also don't want to cover up the vents on the computer. Not that it's being exceptionally taxed at this moment, but it's a bad practice to cover up your vents. So. Here we have Livorno, the Italian Livorno division, which is one of the relatively few Italian units that actually performed pretty well in this particular campaign anyway. Matt Chestnut mentions that he only completed Enemy Action Ardennes solo campaign on Vassal and made his own module for Battlefield's Operation Jubilee to play solo. So Operation Jubilee is, I believe it appeared in Strategy and Tactics, and it uses the same game system, more or less, as the D-Day series, as in D-Day at Omaha Beach and D-Day at Tarawa and those games, which is a justifiably very well-regarded game engine at this point. That said, I've heard people that had problems with Operation Jubilee specifically. And I think it appeared after D-Day at Omaha Beach, which is a great game, by the way. Yeah, I got these mixed up again. Damn it. Some of these... Not all of them, but there's certain of these divisions that in this Sicily are multi-unit formations, and in the other one they're just counters that may, depending on the result of a die roll, actually evaporate on contact with Allied forces, where they just go away. So, the other thing that happened is the side monitor, I knocked it over the other day, so if the webcam is not perfectly positioned, maybe that's why. I'll work on framing off stream. I'm not going to do that on stream. So, and I have something here. This is my Razer Tartarus gamepad, so I can't set the bottle of booze right here. Otherwise, that would be a good idea. Maybe I'll try and arrange that next time. We did the cable management task this week, so that was one of the things that was happening on Sunday, was doing all the cable management behind this desk, because this is like the back of this thing is open to the rest of the room. And let's just say I didn't take the time to do any cable management prior to Sunday. So now everything is zip tied and taped to the bottom of the desk, and it's all very well taken care of. But I consequently have a hard time moving things if I need to move anything. It is 1:40 a.m. here in the UK. I suppose it is. Thank you for joining us. We will be streaming for quite a while yet. I may give to make it up to the people who were disappointed yesterday, I may try and stream a little longer tonight. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I don't have another game to clip handy, however, and I'm making pretty good progress here, but there's a ways to go. If you can wirelessly connect to your TV, that's even better. I don't have that capability. I don't know if I have that capability because I haven't checked. I might actually be able to stream directly to the television because the TV is hooked up to the Wi-Fi. So you can just get a new spring, right? If you broke this spring blows, which is going to happen from time to time because of the Chinese steel that the spring is made out of. you can just get a new spring. That's not a big deal. In that sense, this is easier to repair than the other one, where the other one breaks. You have to actually either try and fix it, which people have had mixed results with. There's some videos on YouTube on how to repair your Oregon Laminations corner clipper. Using that method, people have had mixed results. For some people, it just breaks again instantly. The solution I came up with, well, I didn't come up with, my buddy came up with it. Do I have that handy? I might. It's buried in a drawer. The Deluxe problem, my Deluxe has a hand-cut wooden handle cut out of like half-inch oak. Is it half-inch? Yeah, probably about half-inch. And it obviously will never break again. So, I don't have a Chromecast at this exact moment. Somewhere around here there is a... what's that other one that's more expensive than the Chromecast? I forget. Yeah, again, I very seldom misclip with this, and never, well, not never, but I mean, I have not had any time recently have I had a counter where I clipped the corner off a little bit, and it was so bad that I was like, oh, I ruined the counter. I have not had that happen. And, if you got, 7 count, this thing's got 7 counter sheets, man, nobody's going to notice the one counter with one corner where it's a little bit crooked that's clipped. So, not a concern that I have. And again, some people swear by doing it upside down. I just don't do that. I do need to take this apart and clean it again, however. And by clean it, I mean clean it with WD-40 and Q-tips and all that stuff. Thoroughly cleaned. So if you have the Deluxe, one of the ways you can prevent the Deluxe, there's a particular piece, a particular place on the handle piece of the Deluxe clipper where all of the mechanical stress occurs. And that mechanical stress will be greatest when the clipper is closed all the way. So you can, to some extent, reduce the amount of mechanical stress you are placing on that particular point by gluing some kind of spacer inside the handle so you can't close it all the way. You should still be able to close it enough to clip through the counter. That shouldn't be a problem at all. A lot of people just use dice because everybody's got plenty of dice, right? I went to the store and bought more dice a couple of weeks ago because who doesn't need more dice? I was actually putting together a specific dice set for GTS, where I have one die of each of the fire type colors, and of which there are like 8 or 9 in GTS 2.0. So, I'll be honest, I have had, and again, these, you can, I don't have them all the time, but you can go back and see certain videos on the channel where I have sideburns that are entirely more ferocious than these. So it was, a thing where people would recognize me at conventions because of the sideburns. My sister told me I looked like President Buchanan, who did not have sideburns. But I understood where she was coming from, and I thought it was cute. My sister does, in fact, not have a degree in history. Now, you might have, depending on your home Wi-Fi, you might have lag issues if you set up a wireless connection between the PC and the screen. So that is a fair point. I have not tried it. Well, that's technically not true. I have streamed... Okay, so I have 2 same make and model, same make, not same model, TVs in this room. One of which is like the living room TV, and the other of which is this monitor. They are LG TVs. And at one point, I paid for HBO Max, which is the new... I think it's just called HBO Max. It's the new HBO streaming thing, to watch the new Wonder Woman, which came out on Christmas Day, which is... movie's got some problems. Let me put it that way. There's no app for. I mean, on purpose, I bought a smart TV so I could just install the app for whatever streaming service I want to use. Every other streaming service has an app for LG TVs except for HBO Max. So what I ended up doing was installing the HBO Max app on my phone and then streaming it from my phone to the television. That was a pain in the ass. And I don't recommend doing that because one thing is the phone stays on the whole time. So it will run your phone battery down probably before the end of the movie. It's not the worst movie, but boy, it's got some issues. So, Tony's Board Life, thanks for coming by. Tune in to see Tony live with the ID Jester crew on Saturdays, normally sometime in mid-afternoon. Those guys usually have a lot of fun. Not Hulu. Hulu is a streaming service. Roku is the other streaming stick that I have. Don't know where it is, but because the TVs are now smart TVs, so who cares, right? Other than that one thing. I will mention, by the way, for anybody who is either subscribed to HBO Max or is thinking about being subscribed to HBO Max, it's good for a few different people. One would be a person who's super into shows that happened on HBO. But a lot of those shows you can watch on Amazon, even without an HBO subscription. Not the newer ones, but like if you want to watch The Sopranos or Band of Brothers or something like that, you can watch those if you have an Amazon Prime subscription. If you want to watch the newer stuff, then you got to pay for HBO somehow. If you're super into like DC Comics, not just the movies, but maybe the animated stuff as well. There's a ton of it on HBO Max, and some of it's pretty good, actually. If you want to watch Babylon 5, which I strongly recommend anybody who wants to get into a good, if slightly dated, sci-fi TV show, I highly recommend Babylon 5, although you do have to kind of put up with it for a season before it gets really awesome. That is available on HBO Max as well now in a remastered version, which looks vastly better than the DVD releases, which were a pile of poop. So, Sling is another popular thing. My father-in-law has Sling and highly recommends it, and I don't want to pay for it, so I don't. What division is this? Is the... Well, they're all going in the same compartment anyway, since we got to fit this whole game in one tray. So if I haven't mentioned it Slow Biscuit mentions The Expanse. If I haven't said this, The Expanse is amazing, and you should definitely watch it if you are interested in a sci-fi TV show. I have watched all of it and read all the books up to the point at which there's a huge time jump after book 6, and that will presumably coincide with the end of the next season, which may be the last season on Amazon. Hope it's not. I mean, I use Amazon enough. Jeff Bezos doesn't need my money, but I buy enough stuff from Amazon that it's worth it for the free shipping, which is a little bit of an oversimplification, but it's, it will cost you less to get your stuff shipped. So a lot of the things, nobody can play games all the time, right? I tend to watch TV while clipping counters. Or watch movies or whatever. I mean, I'm signed up right now. We're signed up for Amazon Prime, Netflix, at the moment HBO Max, but that won't be something that I stay signed up to forever. I will like occasionally sign up for something like I'll sooner or later I'll sign up for CBS All Access to watch the new Star Trek stuff. At some point, I'm not in a hurry. Yeah, I haven't paid for cable in several years. Patchwork Pictures asks if Expanse gets better. I don't feel that the first season was all that weak. But if you did, I think it does. I mean, certainly the Julie Mouse story is something that story... I watched season 2, let me put it that way. The Julie Mouse story will come to its conclusion in season 2. Not at the end, in season 2. You will not have to watch the whole thing. I haven't watched live... it's funny you should mention that. Hail to the Glory of Rome says that he doesn't have live TV in his house. I haven't watched live, other than like special events, like maybe a football game or something like that, which every once in a while I will watch. Or the World Cup or something like that. I haven't watched a show on live TV on anything like a regular basis since Babylon 5. It was literally the last thing that I would like make it a point to be in front of the TV at this particular time every week to watch. It was the last show like that. You know how long ago that was. So I've never been particularly a big TV watcher. I mean, certainly you can mindlessly sit in front of the TV and just flip channels and stuff. That's what I do, though. I sit there and flip channels. I don't watch stuff for that long. I've been watching, again, this isn't again, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings movies while clipping counters recently. And I think I've got them all about 3/4 of the way through the Fellowship of the Ring, which for some reason was the last one I watched. Boy, those Hobbit movies are bad. Man, they're bad. The soundtrack... The Howard Shore soundtrack is still really good, and the soundtracks are worth having, but boy, those movies are bad. I mean, there were always, even in the Lord of the Rings movies, there were things that annoyed me. In many cases, those things were in the extended versions, like the fart jokes, for example. And so they at least didn't muddy up the theatrical releases, and all of those things where Peter Jackson felt that he had to punch up, put in an action scene here. All of that is magnified enormously in the Hobbit movies over the way it was in especially in Fellowship of the Ring, which I think is a near perfect adaptation in many ways of that first movie. Gradually, that tendency of Peter Jackson to punch things up with big action scenes. There's more of that in The Two Towers, and there's even more of that in The Return of the King, and there's even more of that in The Hobbit until the Battle of Five Armies, where it's literally the Battle of Five Armies for 2.5 hours. It's ridiculous. I have so many negative things. I have too many negative things to list about those movies. But the first one especially did have some cool stuff. The whole beginning is really good. The part with the trolls is pretty good. The part where, I forget whether this is in the first movie or the second movie, where the whispers, riddles in the dark, where it's Bilbo and Gollum, that part was really good. I can think of nothing that was really... Well, so there's the White Council at Dol Guldur whooping Sauron, which is a ridiculous sequence that looks really cool. It does look really cool. Let's see here. Tony's Board Life bought his father-in-law the entire DVD series. I forget where we were. Whether it's E4 Airman Combat. The old Vic Morrow Combat. Yeah, geez. That's been a while. Kilroy was here mentions that The Expanse is well worth the time and effort and follows the books relatively closely. Yes, it does. it does do character shuffling, which is almost an inevitability. For example, the drummer character that everybody loves that watches the show, everybody loves Drummer, and I do too. That is like a complete background character on in the books, but the story role, and if you've seen season 5, you know what novel role she's going to be fulfilling in season 6. So she is like an amalgam character, and it's all really well done. I actually feel this is probably an unpopular opinion now, but I actually feel like the Game of Thrones show for several seasons was better than the books. It was way, at least maybe not the first season or two, but like after that, it became way less flabby than the books, and it was in my opinion superior. And then at the end, everybody got sick of being there, and they half-assed it at the end. So they ruined what goodwill they had earned with an unearned ending. So I saw Howard Shore visited, this was many years ago now, conducted the Cleveland Orchestra, which, laugh or not, the Cleveland Orchestra is like one of the top 20 or 10 orchestras in the world. Doing a suite from the Lord of the Rings movies, and it was amazing. So that was really cool. It was at Severance Hall in Cleveland, which I have been in twice. Once was to do that, and the other time was to see Stephen Hawking give a lecture, which was also awesome. Rat Patrol, I loved that show as a kid, actually. Stigler says Jackson's biggest mistake with The Hobbit was his attempt to rewrite parts of it. Yeah, so, I mean, well, so, up to the first movie, Stigler has it right here. You don't need to add anything, right? There are certain parts that you have to cut. You have to cut Tom Bombadil, for example, at least in a movie format. If you were trying to do it as a TV series, that might be different, but in a movie format, you cannot keep Tom Bombadil. You cannot keep Glorfindel, who's one of my favorite little side characters in the whole thing, but frankly, you can't, he shows up, you never see him again. So he is impossible to keep. Things have to be cut. But where the movie adds stuff, it almost universally rings false. I actually didn't necessarily mind the idea that in the Hobbit films, we were going to see the material from the appendices in the Lord of the Rings, like the White Council stuff and all of that. But it all sucks. It was not well done. Radagast is a clown, a cool background character reduced to a literally poop-smeared moron that rides around in like a squirrel chariot. It's asinine. There is a fan edit of the Hobbit movies called, there's a bunch, but called the Cardinal Cut, that I thought was pretty, I mean, it's not perfect, but it more or less limits the stuff to what's in the book, more or less, and keeps the whole thing to about 3.5 hours, I think, and is as close as you're going to get to salvaging that train wreck. No, this is Ohio, 100% Ohio wheat whiskey. Made from 100% Ohio wheat. Well, that is the Stigler. That is the tough part. And you can, I mean, like I said, I think you can see the differences between, say, the Fellowship of the Ring and any of the Hobbit movies, but especially the third Hobbit movie. The other thing is, I mean, they didn't even set out making that thing as a 3-movie thing. It was going to be a 2-movie thing. And supposedly this was a creative decision, but everybody knows that's nonsense. The studio came in and said, no, we need 3 movies. So they padded it out. And it feels super padded. I mean, the one that they cut the most out of was the third one. That third movie is like 2 hours of padding. Also, I mean, on paper, everything sounded fine. It's like, okay, so they did the framing device with Frodo. That's fine. You know, you didn't need to, but that's fine. Legolas cameo would have been totally fine, where they go see Thranduil and he's just like hanging around in the back. Maybe he has a line or two of dialogue. That would have been maybe he shows up at the Battle of Five Armies, and is like a background dude there. That would have been completely fine. Having scenes with the White Council and all that stuff, that's all fine on paper. But then when the execution time came, it was a disaster. So that actually did start. Terrence Bonham mentions that started as a Guillermo del Toro project, and he stepped away from it at some point. Now, I don't know why, but it could have been due to maybe it was due to studio interference. Who knows? Or maybe it was just due to the delays, because there was a lot of legal rights stuff that had to get ironed out to make that. If you would like to see a much better adaptation of The Hobbit, watch the Rankin Bass Hobbit. It's goofy in places, but it absolutely captures the spirit of The Hobbit far, far better than the Peter Jackson movies did. For that matter, there are individual scenes in the Rankin Bass Return of the King that I think are better than in the Peter Jackson Return of the King. Not Benicio del Toro, Guillermo del Toro, the director. So it's interesting that we're drifting off the wargame topic here, obviously. We live in a society, I guess that's a thing that I didn't know about. We are kind of in the golden age of television, right? So it is possible to make some of these things that would frankly be impossible to adapt as movies and have it not be total garbage. To adapt them as TV series. So we are going to see it in production, at some level in production, with Amazon Studios, is a Wheel of Time adaptation. I'm very curious to see that. They may screw it up, but a bunch of cast has been announced, and I think it looks fairly promising. HBO has done... I mean, HBO's kind of like the best in class here with this kind of stuff, traditionally, but a lot of other production locations are trying their best to catch up to that, right? There's some really good stuff that Netflix has done. There's even a couple good things that Showtime has done. So up until the end, where I guess it's another one of those they screwed up the end, Dexter was really good. And that was on Showtime for several years. Way better than the books. The books are not awesome. But the show was really good until the end, where I guess they screwed it up. But I would have been delighted. Brant, thanks for stopping by. I would have been delighted to have seen a Dune TV series. I think that could have worked really well. I'm curious to see what the Denis Villeneuve thing looks like. Was my most anticipated movie of last year, and it didn't come out. And I think it's headed to HBO Max. Greatest all-time TV series. I never want to see things quite in that way. I mean, there's certainly a short list of these are my favorite TV series of all time, and that's fine. But I tend not to think in terms of that. I mean, if you cornered me and said, "What is the greatest TV series of all time?" How do we judge that? I mean, do we say through longevity? Because we have shark jump. Happy Days jump the shark. They literally jumped the shark. Game of Thrones jumped the shark without an actual shark. There are shows that didn't, that went out really strong. Babylon 5 is one, frankly. There has been no shark jumping moment in The Expanse thus far. And I expect there to not be, given that they have a wealth of material to draw from, but only one season left to do it in. Those who have read the series will be able to better make sense of that, frankly. Basically, there's going to be 9 books in the series, and after book 6, there's like a 20 or 30 year jump in time. So where to stop is actually after book 6, which works out to be season 6. They haven't mapped one for one between books and seasons. Like book 1 is about the first season and a half, for example. I've heard good things about The Wire, and I was not able to make it through the first couple episodes. One of the cool things about the Witcher adaptation from Netflix is, A, I like Henry Cavill. And B, it did a nice job of straddling the balance between having the episodes actually mostly stand, like the story in the episode standing alone, but the episode nevertheless fitting into a larger arc. I thought that was quite well done. I don't necessarily think it ended at the best possible spot, but, you know, there's a season 2 in production. So, and I do say this, it is supposedly more based on the books than the games. I have never gotten very far in any of the games. I think I have all 3 of them at this point. Another slightly disappointing thing is, very early in The Witcher, there's in the first episode or 2, there's a really awesome fight scene, and none of the other fight scenes in the rest of the season, are as cool as that one. So there's that. A lot of people will talk about Babylon 5 in that same context, where you have to get through that first season to really enjoy it. And that's true, however, where I find the series starts to come into its own. There's certainly some not awesome episodes in that first season. Is in like the 3rd and 4th episodes. I forget exactly what order these appear in. But in the first 4 episodes, there's 2 episodes. So there's Midnight on the Firing Line, which is the first post-pilot episode. There's the Gathering is the pilot. There's the Soul Hunter episode, which is actually a pretty cool episode, and quite well done. And the actor is very interesting. The actor who plays the Soul Hunter is Morgan Shepherd, who is a veteran of many things, Hawk the Slayer being one of them. But then the 3rd and 4th episode, one of them is a Londo episode, and one of them is a Jakar episode, and they're both fantastic. And that, to me, is where the series began to work. Let's sort. I am down to everything is done here except for the miscellaneous stuff. Now there's an episode, I forget what the episode is called. I refer to it as the Bloodsport episode because that's what it is. It's there's a alien martial arts tournament. as asinine an idea as that sounds, it works remarkably well. And they actually got the guy who runs the alien martial arts tournament is actually the guy from, I don't know if it was Bloodsport, but it was from that kind of movie, Suntek Oh, who was a mainstay of those kinds of movies. Everybody complains about Firefly, and I think everyone is dissatisfied at this time with Joss Whedon, and that's more drama that we're not going to get into on this stream, because that just blew up again. But where is the transport units? There it is. We got all kinds of like mule transport units in this thing and everything. I mean, everybody agrees that Firefly did not get a fair shake. And certainly, I started watching it when it was on TV. And I didn't see all the episodes. I think they broadcast like 9 episodes or something like that. And they kept changing the time slot. Fox didn't know what to do with it. And everything that was like planned out for the first few seasons all got packed into that movie. And consequently, it felt somewhat unsatisfying. I mean, if I had to say what is my I can't even think in these terms. I mean, I'm inclined to say the original Star Trek, to be honest. Groundbreaking show in every respect. But maybe the what was that called? The movie that was the show that was remade into a movie with Harrison Ford, The Fugitive. That might be, because that's one of the first shows that I could think of where there's like an overall arc. Now, it was still pretty much episodic in the case of the Fugitive. The show that really gave us arc-based television is, in fact, Babylon 5. There were other things that started to adapt that same idea, even while, including Deep Space Nine, while Babylon 5 was on the air. So you will never hear, there are ways in which it is a bit clunky nowadays in retrospect, but I think it's still highly watchable. Ooh, Cleopatra 2525. I think I might have watched an episode of that. It seemed fairly terrible. Andromeda with Kevin Sorbo was definitely fairly terrible. I may have watched that for one of the actresses in the show from time to time. Oh, you can't call Firefly. So the one thing that I'll say about Firefly is the one thing that everybody says about Firefly, which is that it sure looks like somebody's traveler campaign. Now, that's never been officially acknowledged, but let's face it, it looks a lot like somebody's traveler campaign. To a degree that I think you cannot ignore. I watched, not that long ago, for the first time, I'd actually never seen Hawk the Slayer. It's on Amazon Prime Video. It is actually a lot of fun. So Xena was actually of those two shows, Xena and Hercules, Xena was the better one. Not really a personal favorite by any means, but it was the better of the two, consistently the better of the two shows. Not that that's an incredibly high bar to cross, to be honest, but we are going to be able to very easily get all of this stuff into this tray. But only by doing some things like putting all the transport in. You know, what I'd be inclined to say is the best show, if you had to say one show is the best show of all time, The Twilight Zone. The Rod Serling, The Twilight Zone. It's so good that they keep bringing it back. There's a new version hosted by Jordan Peele on CBS All Access. I don't know if it's still a thing, but they did at least a season of it. I didn't see any of those, but we're getting into rather creepy territory here in the chat, so we are going to very, very tightly compact all these Italian multi-unit formations into this tray. It's going to be very tight. That said, I'm pretty sure it'll work. Since the move, I don't know where I have about 5 pairs of these tweezers. I have about 5 pairs of them. This is the only one I can find. That's kind of annoying. That said, at least I can find one. And when we go play OCS, for example, there's tweezers over there, so I don't really need to bring my own tweezers. Okay. Whew. That's all of that. Doing things like putting all the HQs, Allied and Axis, in the same compartment, for example, here. All the transport, all the naval is going all in the same compartment. I've seen a fair number of like sci-fi celebrities at conventions, but I've never been one to like wait in line or go to the seminar or anything like that. I saw George Takei was at Gen Con, I think, one year. Will Wheaton was at Origins one year. Kevin Sorbo was at Origins one year, too. Mira Furlan, who just passed away of Babylon 5. I saw her. I saw Claudia Christian. I saw Jerry Ryan at a Gen Con years ago. This was back when I know it must have been because I haven't been to Gen Con since it moved from Milwaukee. I liked Milwaukee, for what it's worth. Magnum PI was a pretty good show. They tried to bring that back too, but I don't think that's still around. I think that the new Hawaii Five-0 is still around. They made the fatal error, and which they fortunately fixed like 2 episodes in, of screwing up the title sequence and theme music. That's literally the only reason to watch that show. So Matt Taylor, getting back to the topic of board games, Stuka Joe just released another turn. So if you're interested in that game Lion of Khartoum, which presumably is about Gordon and the Mahdi and all that stuff, I haven't really looked at the game, nor have I had the time to watch Stuka Joe's videos. But Stuka Joe does best-in-class playthrough videos, so if you're interested in the game remotely, and probably maybe even if you're not, you should check those out. Matt Taylor asks, is Target for today a reprint of B-17 Queen of the Skies? So short answer to that is absolutely not. It is, however, a game in a rather similar style to similar style to B-17 Queen of the Skies. So it's more or less. Is it here or is it upstairs? It's upstairs. So I actually think that it's more detailed than B-17 Queen of the Skies, and I actually think it's better because you can fly 4 or 5 different planes, 3 or 4 or 5 different planes in it. It's not just B-17s. Now, there were fan variants, and I think at least one variant in the general, to fly different planes in B-17 Queen of the Skies as well, but I think the Target for today is, I think, the more comprehensive package of the two. But I don't believe one can credibly consider it to be a reprint or a reimagining of B-17 Queen of the Skies. It is its own thing that happens to be mechanically similar and on the same topic. But not more mechanically similar than, say, comparing... that's a bad example. Comparing Panzer Group Guderian to Operation Grenade. You know, not more similar than that. Dark Shadows. I never even heard of that when it existed. They've tried to bring that back several times, too. I did see the movie, the Tim Burton movie, which was awful. Crime Story. Now, I remember that with a really great cover of Del Shannon's Runaway as the title song, too. That was a really cool show. I'm reasonably sure that's the first I ever saw of Dennis Farina, too. I think. So this is another... I'd be able to tell the difference if I had the ring light on. It is very difficult for me to see the color difference between these Allied ships and the Italian ships that are on the same row. It doesn't matter because they're all going in the same counter compartment anyway. So John Longshore, you may be the GMT and formerly, I believe, Yaquinto? Panzer might be the game for that, actually. There's also a lot of people. I saw a lot of people playing this, and I think ID Jester, either ID Jester or Tony, and if Tony's still around, he might be able to clarify. They have done some playthrough of Tank Duel. I believe that's a Mike Berticelli game, and it is it's like sort of a beer and pretzels-y type of thing. I haven't played it, but it I see it get played and hear about it getting played a lot. I saw it getting played a lot at Compass Expo last year, which was the second to last convention I went to. Well, I think I said my piece on Wayne's review last week. Don't want to go over that again, except maybe to mention that I fully support Wayne's right to do whatever kind of video reviews he wants, and that I don't believe that Wayne's video was unfair. The designer might differ with that statement, but I won't. All of the Panzer stuff is getting reprinted by GMT, and I believe that's another White Knight type of reprint batch where somebody decided they were going to front GMT the money to just reprint everything. That's happened in the past. So Tony's Board Life mentions that they're doing it next Sunday between him, Rough Swordsman Wargamer, and ID Jester. It's supposed to be a lot of fun. But you can watch all those videos, so I'd recommend... John Madison, thanks for stopping by. How's the OCS Discord server going, by the way? I'll be honest, one of the things... I mean, like everybody, I suspect, I kind of run hot and cold on different topics and different game systems or whatever. And right now, I am super high on OCS again. A part of that's probably that we have resumed local OCS play now at this point. I mean, there's only 3 of us in that particular room, so it's not like we have 20 people breeding disease or anything like that. And everybody in there has either already had COVID. I still don't have my sense of taste back, by the way, or doesn't care. So that's great. Like to see... so one thing I will tell you is that screen sharing through Discord is limited to 720 unless you are paying for an upgraded service. That makes screen sharing through Discord, if that is something you need, somewhat less than desirable. And John is asking about old school micro armor, which I have never personally touched. I've never really done, with the possible exception of a couple of one-shot convention type things, I've never really done historical miniatures. I've done a fair amount of fantasy, sci-fi, steampunk, whatever miniatures, genre miniatures, I guess. Either that thing from with the steampunk mechs, I can never remember what this thing is called, or Warhammer, or Full Thrust, or something, something like that. Never really done historical miniatures. Huge can of worms to open if you want to get into historical miniatures. Historical miniatures in general, but historical miniatures in particular. Half-Assed Gaming, check out the OCS. You might find it helpful anyway. The OCS boot camp from a few weeks ago on the channel. Very happy with the reception of that thus far. Also, it's going to depend on me getting this fit into the schedule somehow. But there is talk behind the scenes of additional OCS tutorial content here at Ardwulf's Lair. So, yeah, I'd have to look at the pay plans for Discord. I mean, a big part of the reason, even the free Discord, like the audio is actually pretty decent. It's not amazing, but it's pretty decent. I used it for any kind of co-op streaming that's not video, like the game live stream that we did on Sunday. That we use Discord for that. Whenever this happens, well, if I'm going to do an RPG live stream, it's probably going to be done using StreamYard. And at that point, that may indicate that I'm going to pony up money for StreamYard. Jester was playing Path of Exile, which is a game I've looked at. It looks like a Diablo clone, which nothing wrong with. There's lots of Diablo clones. So he does some video game channel on his video game content on his channel, and also some sports game content on his channel. 46%, folks. In addition to wargame stuff. Also, he did a very, if you're interested in seeing, let's say, spectacularly negative commentary, Jester did a really, really thorough takedown of Dan Verson Games over one of their Kickstarters. I forget which one. One of the recent Kickstarters that was delivered with some significant printing problems. Let's put it that way. John asks, what do you use for just playing running RPGs but not streaming it? I would use Discord. I would use Discord, and you could probably get some kind of online whiteboard for screen sharing, or Roll20. Use Roll20. Not for audio. Discord's audio is better than Roll20's audio, which is a sack of garbage. John, you probably might be interested in a relatively recently released RPG called Against the Dark Master, which is sort of a MERP Rollmaster retro clone. That's an oversimplification. That's not exactly what it is, but at a very first glance, that is absolutely what it looks like. I have obtained a PDF copy, and I have a hard copy coming, supposedly, and I am super excited about that thing. So, when I have, at the moment anyway, the plan is for me to run that, but we'll see. I haven't actually put anything together. I played 40K when it came out in the book, right? So it was never as awesome as it was out of that book, frankly. And I am at this point out of the miniatures in general, but in no small part that's due to Games Workshop, and they're turning it into this entire separate hobby that I don't have the time. Dark Master, exactly spelled that way. If you search for Against the Dark Master, you'll find it. Just checking up on the chat here. Yeah, I can't really deal with... I mean, my concern, my reluctance to deal with miniatures is based on just how much time it costs to do it, right? To paint the miniatures and buy the miniatures and clean the miniatures up. I don't like HARP, I will tell you. I'll get to that in a second. I just don't want it. It feels like a separate hobby to wargaming, is just dealing with the miniatures, and I don't have the time or money for it. I don't have the bandwidth on any level. So what HARP is it's Iron Crown, so new Iron Crown, that's a long story, has like a somewhat informed by the concepts of Rollmaster and Middle-earth role-playing, but simpler game called HARP, High Adventure Role-Playing. And I don't like it. I actually feel that it runs slower than Rollmaster does, than Rollmaster run by organized people. It's certainly possible to bung Rollmaster up. It does have some things that I think are better, like the experience system. I think just the sources of experience are much better in HARP than they are in Rollmaster, where it becomes this kind of mini game to track the XP. But I'm very impressed with, and it seems like it has the downsides of Rollmaster without the upsides, without the colorful critical tables or anything like that. And that was what we loved about Rollmaster, was the fact that you had the spectacular critical tables, you know? Many people have used, and in fact the whole thing started as an addendum to D&D with the release of the original Arms Law. Researching this for a video in 1980 was originally intended as a supplement that contained a whole new combat system for any role-playing game, meaning D&D at the time. And that idea is still visible as late as about 1983, when it became obvious that it was moving in the direction of being its own system. Half-Ass Gaming, I know what you're talking about, but other than that, I have no information on that whatsoever. So let me talk about this, and then we'll get back to war games. A couple Kickstarters floating around. There's the Mercenary Kickstarter for a Mongoose Traveler, which is relatively impressive looking. There's a new edition of... So, Cubicle 7 did a Middle-earth role-playing game called The One Ring. And it's probably mechanically, system-wise, the best treatment of Middle-earth ever done. In terms of setting material, I actually still like the Old Iron Crown Middle-earth supplements. But in terms of the rules, it's really good. They lost the rights to it. And my concern was that it was going to evaporate and just turn into, somebody else would grab the rights and do a completely new game system. Well, the rights have been picked up by Free League Publishing, which is the same people that do Forbidden Lands. And they are doing a new edition of that system with the original designer and everything. And there's a Kickstarter up for that now. It made its Kickstarter goal in 4 minutes. So it's way over, into the stretch goals. There is also a Kingdoms of Harn Kickstarter coming that I would like to get them on to talk about when it launches. This is going to be hardcover Kingdom modules. I'm real curious to see how that looks. I don't have much information about it other than their hardcover Harn Kingdom modules, which would be awesome. I just don't know what the details are yet, and the Kickstarter is not yet live. The other thing that I had in the fire from last year, neither of which has been delivered yet, is the new edition of War and Peace, which is a beautiful package, and the Mongoose Traveler Deep Night Revelation campaign, which is another really nice package. And I'm hoping to have both of those sometime in the next few months. And there'll be video on both items as they arrive. So, let's store. USA, I packed all my stuff in this is going to be difficult. Just the book boxes that I got from the storage company. I got a storage locker. And I got my boxes from them, not tremendously cheap boxes. It is much, much easier to deal with war games, which are in boxes that are relatively light, versus books or role-playing games, which tend to be books. New War and Peace, it's at the printer. I'm guessing March or April. That's I'd have to double check that number, but I believe that's not completely off base. I'm not totally sure I'm going to get all this naval in here. Let's find out. There's a lot of naval. Well, there's a lot of naval in here, but that's because of the amphibious landing craft mostly. Which probably means I should put the other naval in a different compartment. So let's do that. Because you got to sort the landing craft out anyway when you play this thing. I always like doing the landings, even in Normandy games. A lot of people don't. A lot of people just want to get to the action. And I have some sympathy for that point of view, but I always like to do the landings. And we're going to see, at some point, hopefully not too much longer, a Normandy game from MMP and OCS. The designer is Roland LeBlanc. Is that his last name? The designer of Beyond the Rhine, which I have relatively significant issues with Beyond the Rhine, but they are all with the opening of the game, and the cross-channel attack will explicitly include like scenarios where you don't have to deal with the landing, where you start with somewhat of a beachhead already, and that's gonna, I think, save a lot of time and save people who don't necessarily want to deal with that significant grief by allowing them to not deal with the landings if they don't want to. I am a sucker in general for Normandy games, so that is even if I were to assume that it will have as many problems as Beyond the Rhine has, I would buy that. I will buy that in a heartbeat. So Husa also mentions that the ASL journals are so expensive when they're out of print. If you don't, and some of them don't come with like extra stuff. They're all available in PDF now from Wargame Vault for like $6 a piece. So, and I mean, you don't have like the mini games, like if it came with an ASL module, you don't get that. But you get everything else. So if you just want the scenarios or the articles or whatever, you have all that stuff. That's totally worth doing. I will also mention, somebody mentioned this earlier in the chat. There is a digital version of the ASL rulebook from MMP now available at Wargame Vault as well. That, for the mere virtue of searchability, boy, that's worthwhile. It has already been updated twice, and as updates are made, they will be pushed out through Wargame Vault for free. So you just download a new version. That's part of Drive-Thru-RPG. That's the Wargame part of Drive-Thru-RPG, and a lot of what is on there is not of interest to me, except the multi-man stuff. That's the multi-man's being pretty. I don't want to say aggressive, but they're pushing now digital content that I really like to see. I'm not going to pay $75 for an old ASL annual. I'm just not. But I'll be happy to pay $6 for a PDF. That's no problem. I mean, mostly what I want those for are the scenarios, right? So that saves me the problem. I just print out those 4 pages or whatever. Boom, I'm good to go. And at least one of the historical modules you can also buy. It's a separate purchase, but it's also not expensive. You can buy the map. This hobby being what it is, there's people complaining about there being a digital version. It's like, well, what do you mean? I have to pay for it again? Well, no, you don't have to pay for it again. If you bought another version of the copy of the rulebook, you'd have to pay for it again. That's what you're doing. And I store all that stuff in the cloud. I use OneDrive for that. You can use Google Drive or Amazon Web Storage or whatever you got, or Box or whatever. I use OneDrive because it gives me enough space to store all of my wargaming rules and a decent chunk of my RPG stuff that goes in and out on a rotating basis in the cloud and accessible on all of my devices for $2 a month. So yes, so there's a couple different Stigler. There's a couple different versions of that. The original SPI was, in fact, Operation Cobra. That's what it was. It did not include the landings. The TSR version expanded it with another map to include the landings. And then Decision, some years later, in Strategy and Tactics, produced a new updated version, which also included the extra map and the landings. And then just recently, in the last 2 years, they produced a boxed version of that game, which is the currently available Decision Games Cobra. It is one of the SPI games that has and maintains a very strong reputation. Normandy 44 I like a ton, actually. I think that's a really good game. I'm a little cold on the Zachbond mechanics specifically at this exact moment, and I'm not sure why, because every Zachbond play experience I've had was very positive. That's Ardennes, Normandy, and Holland 44. It feels a little weird, and I think it's just because I haven't played it lately. And by lately, I mean like in the last 3 or 4 years. But I mean, you got to be careful with decision games. Let me put it that way. I'm going to continue to say that they do produce some games that are worth your time. They also produce some games that are not worth your time. So, caveat emptor. Let's put it that way. Makes me miss my Latin class. Anyway. Yes, so Kenneth Kloby mentions that there is some YouTube video on the new War and Peace. The one I can think of off the top of my head is Gilbert Collins did some video on it, which kind of Gilbert spent my money for me on that, to be honest. There's a couple reasons why I think it is worthwhile. And I have the original, and I've played the original. It's quite a good game. I think the campaign game is less functional than it should be, and played multiplayer, it is flatly busted. I don't know that that's fixed in the new version. However, the new version has components of vastly superior quality. The graphics are better. The new map is beautiful. It is hard-mounted map. 2 hard-mounted maps, in fact. Also, a weird artifact of the old map is that the rivers run through the center of hexes rather than along hex sides. And that's really weird and creates this necessity for these weird rules where it's like, okay, so if you're entering these hex, you're attacking into the hex with the unit, then you have to cross the river but if you're coming from a different hex side, you don't have to. It's weird. The new edition fixes that and just has the rivers conform to the hex sides, and that's just better. It's just easier, and at that scale, it's ridiculous to have to deal with that. So it is a very nice looking game. There were some people that had negative things to say about the One Small Step edition. I looked at those complaints and at the actual amount of errata and corrections, which is supposed to be all corrected in this new version, and decided that I didn't feel like taking them particularly seriously. Okay, so Slow Biscuit mentions the Toddler Krieg series of games. So there are 3 kinds of games. I don't want to turn this into a Decision bitch fest, but there are 3 kinds of games, general classes of games that Decision Games produces. There are SPI classics, and I'm talking about like legit SPI classics. SPI games that are games that Decision now holds the rights to and are still held up as very good games. There's a number of these, right? Cobra's one of them. Empress of the Middle Ages is one of them. The other class of games from Decision are games for which the designer and or the designer's team carefully curates those games. An example of these would be the D-Day series, the John Butterfield D-Day series. So specifically D-Day at Omaha Beach, Tarawa, and Peleliu. Iwo Jima was done by a different designer. I don't know about that one. Those are very good games. The third category, class of games produced by Decision Games, are the games that are shit. So you need to understand before making a purchase which of the 3 categories these games fall into. The only example that I have of games that do not fit that mold are the Goss games, where the curation is really at this point in the hands of the developer rather than the designer. And all progress, I think there's a lot to like in that game system, even though it's really complicated. And the games are really expensive and really big, and the scenario support is generally poor. I still think those games are worth a look. And, I mean, the ideas come from Joe Youst, the designer, but a lot of them have been pushed and prodded into shape by Doug Johnson, the developer, who I think should get an enormous amount of credit. So So anyway, and I actually think the Total Krieg falls into the second of those two categories. Games that are being carefully curated by one or more of the designers in that case. Designers on that were Alan Emmerich, Sal Vasta, and another guy who is the guy who's pretty much the guy in charge of it right now. Those are pretty good games. The rules writing approach is a difficult one, but not necessarily a flawed one. And I think the Total Krieg games are worth your time. I don't blame people for not wanting to expend the bandwidth to figure out which of those three categories a particular title falls into before they buy it. It is a fair consumer decision to just wash your hands of it and not want to deal with it. The other thing is, so when you look at decision titles that share the name of an SPI game, some of those games, most of them are in fact more or less straight reprints of the classic. Is that really true? Some of them at least are more or less straight reprints of the classic SPI title. Others are complete redesigns, and not necessarily in a good way. In the case of Atlantic Wall and Wacht am Rhein, where they're GOS games, I think you do gain something by the redesign. In other cases, like Wellington's Victory, or what was the other example I had in my head? War in the Pacific. I don't think you gain anything by the redesign. The decision games War in the Pacific is a $400+ thing with 9. This is the actual number. This is not my off-the-cuff overstatement of the number. 9,000 counters in that box. There is simply no way that was play-tested sufficiently. And I will be happy, as usual, I will be happy to accept corrections, but I don't believe that very many people will choose to argue with me about this. The designer has passed away, which is unfortunate. It is possible that individual, whose name I can't remember, unfortunately, I apologize for that, would have assisted with further development until that thing was in a playable condition, but it is a novelty piece. The SPI War in the Pacific, by all accounts, had its issues. The Decision War in the Pacific basically throws out all the things that SPI's War in the Pacific had that worked or were cool, replaces them with stuff that didn't work and wasn't cool, and then bloats it by about an order of magnitude on top of that. So, now again, I own a number, for a while actually, Decision Games, in terms of my library, the way I track this stuff anyway, was like my number 2 company. I think they're not anymore, but I mean, there's artifacts in the way I track that stuff. I don't track supplements as part of that count, for example. So like all that ASL stuff, all counts as, I mean, it's 2 line items, ASL and ASL starter kit, and not 30. So bear that in mind, but everybody's got their own idiosyncratic way of doing this. So one of the decision things that was pretty well regarded was S&T number 300, including Desert Fox Deluxe. And it sold out very quickly, was well received, and then when they went to reprint it as a boxed game, they apparently introduced some new and hitherto unforeseen errors into it, even though there's no reason to do that, because they already had it done. So I don't know what's up with that. I don't have that. It's kind of on my list of things that I'd like to have, but it doesn't seem like a particularly a thing that I need, because I'm not super enamored with the Desert War, and I have DAC or DAC 2, and I don't, thank you, John Longshore, and I don't really need another desert game, another fairly large desert game on top of that. So I'm good. I'm good on the desert. I've heard good things about Barbarossa Deluxe 2. I've heard good things about their version of the World War I, which is the SPI game. And again, these are basically Battle for Germany looks pretty nice. These are basically straight reprints. Other than the fact that the counters have center nibs, which is inexplicable, I'm pretty happy with what I've seen of Empires of the Middle Ages so far. At some point, by the way, that's gonna feature in a counter clipping stream, but that's one that I got to cut them out of the counter sheets with a knife rather than just tearing them out because of the center nibs. Let me get back to that for a minute because I didn't quite get this. I mentioned that I don't generally like to use baggies, but that there are exceptions. So here, let me talk about the exceptions. Games that I store in baggies are games where I want to hand the players their stuff and say, here you go. You can manage this counter mix. And where that's possible are games like, say, the Napoleonic Wars, the GMT Napoleonic Wars, or Here I Stand, where most of the counters I'm handing them are just like strength points of various denominations, then maybe a few other things. Other games like this would be like Civilization or Here I Stand or any of that family of games. But on the other hand, those I'm comfortable putting in baggies because I could just say, hey, here's a bag of French strength points. Here you go, and 5 other things. Here you go. You could babysit this. On the other hand, another game where I want to just be able to like hand the player their stuff is Space Empires 4X. But in the case of Space Empires 4X, those counters are not predominantly one kind of thing. There's 20 or 30 different kinds of ships and pipeline markers and all this other stuff. So I have stored Space Empires 4X in an outside-the-box storage solution, which is not my preference. But I have used these container store trays, which are the smaller versions of the bigger ones that I showed earlier. These are about $4 a piece. These have 18 compartments. And there's enough compartments in here to reasonably sort out one faction's stuff, including all the expansion material. All right, I believe we are in the chat still complaining about decision games. I'm trying to get away from that. Tony gets a snow day tomorrow, so that's awesome. Good for you. So do I, but I'm unemployed, so that's why. I might not. It's still ice storm. I can hear the ice hitting the window behind me. Right. This is in fact a window behind me. Jeff mentions that when he came back, he was surprised to see S&T still being published. You know what? I actually shared that experience. I wasn't surprised to see S&T because I still see it on the newsstand at what was Borders at the time. But I kind of drifted away from wargaming specifically because in the late 90s, I guess it would have been, it wasn't obvious to me. The couple of people that I was gaming with had drifted away to do various other things. It wasn't obvious to me that there was any wargaming happening anymore. These guys weren't showing up to, the companies weren't showing up to Origins anymore. I wasn't going to wargaming specific events, those that existed at the time. Origins in general, this is worth a whole show, has started out as a wargaming event and has steadily drifted away from wargaming as its focus for the entire time. And now it's kind of just, there's a small amount of wargaming that happens there in what is a really fairly large event. What I was surprised, it wasn't, so I drifted away because it wasn't obvious to me that besides the guys I knew that got into World War II reenacting as opposed to wargaming, they had drifted away. I didn't see anything besides ASL that was happening, and I didn't know that I wanted to deal with ASL. Starter kit not being available at the time. So when I decided I was getting back in, naturally, I had made the decision to get into, well, yeah, okay, I'll do ASL because I know people are still doing ASL. I had been to ASL Oktoberfest in the past, and I was aware that that was still a thing that was happening, and it was still drawing 100 or 150 people, or whatever it is, people. And the fact that it's in my hometown was also a potential factor as well. But then I started doing research, and started seeing, you know, hey, there's a lot of war games still being published here on BGG, and looking at YouTube, and there's like a whole bunch of channels, and this guy Stuka Joe is awesome. And, you know, Callendale was still around at the time. Callendale, by the way, is having a real tough time right now. So if you, I haven't done this, and I feel bad. I would encourage anyone who is inclined to do so to express support to Callendale. But I was surprised to see that there was a not huge, but a very small and collegial but thriving community of YouTube wargaming, right? It did not even occur to me that that would be something that would be happening. So I completely understand, and for a number of years, and this is kind of not, I don't want to say it hasn't happened lately, but it's been more obvious to me that it's been happening. But for a long time, my official like journalistic thing that I would go to Origins for would be to document the wargaming that was happening there. To show people that, no, that guy that says there's no wargaming at Origins anymore is wrong. There still is. It's not as dominant as it used to be, or as prominent as it used to be. And I wish it was, but I could put these in here. It is absolutely still there. We need to... I can get it all in one compartment. We are done with Sicily, Triumph, and Folly. There's only one counter sheet that was... There's 2 counter sheets of units. Might be 2.5, to be honest. But I only had 1 left. So... I would prefer to get this into 2 counter trays, but 2 counter trays will not fit in the box. And that is another angle of wargame storage that we wargamers often have to deal with, is wargames with so much stuff that you cannot possibly fit it all back in the box. So, a lot of times I can get away with just doing like a marker tray. So I have like a Great Campaigns of the American Civil War marker tray and an OCF marker tray. And that will then save me a fair amount of space in the boxes. Maybe enough to get the entire rest of the game in the boxes, which has always been the case with Great Campaigns so far. Games where I just can't deal with trying to store it in the boxes, like ASL, right? Almost nobody stores their ASL stuff in the boxes. So my ASL, Goss is a game that I don't think I can well organize in the boxes, even though the boxes are all really big. So those go in the same container store trays. That's done. I just got to put it where it goes on the shelf. What else? Twilight in the East, when I had it, Thunder in the East, when I had it, was stored outside the boxes. Trying to think of other examples. Almost not. So ASL, I throw the boxes away. I don't have room for the boxes. The only boxes I have are boxes that are storing components that I haven't gone through yet. Like I have an entire 3-inch box of unpunched ASL counter trays or counter sheets. That's a problem. I got to do something about that. So we may be doing ASL. We've done ASL on the counter clipping stream before. We get caught up on the chat here. Krusty Captain says Goss is awesome. I think Goss has a lot to offer, actually, and I wish it was being published by a different company. E4 Airman mentions that War and Peace has been delayed. I haven't heard that. That does not mean that you are wrong. I hope it hasn't. I would rather it release in a state of total perfection and be late. It's already paid for. I'm good. Hex to Hex, I've been watching your Kiev to Rostov stuff. Please keep that up. That's good stuff. Matt Chestnut asks, buy a game off eBay and all the counters are all loose in the box. Yes, that has in fact occurred. I mean, this Case Blue and Guderian's Blitzkrieg 2 thing, I got this, you can't see it on camera, but I have 4 of these cube compartments down here that is basically currently storing the miscellaneous stuff out of GB2 and Case Blue. It wouldn't have been that different for it to just all arrive in a gallon Ziploc bag. And it wouldn't have been less work for me. I should have told him, look, just dump it all in a Ziploc bag and don't ship it to me in a refrigerator-sized box. DCB went to Gen Con 1974. Wow. So did they have, was it 74 that D&D was around? Was it around? I don't know when in the year it was released. So that would have been an amazing and memorable year to be at Gen Con. Kaiser Bill mentions that Don Greenwood frequently lamented in the general that computers were killing wargaming. In fact, the internet revitalized the hobby. So, it's funny. That's another funny thing. And I think it was easy to make that assumption. There was a certain point at which it was easy to make that assumption. And I don't think it panned out at any point. Right now, the general surge, a lot of people spend a lot of time in front of the computer. So for recreation, they want to do things that are not in front of the computer, which I think is one factor that has led people back to analog games. And because people are being pointed back to analog games because they want humans, wargaming is benefiting from that. We are in sort of a second summer of wargaming right now. Not to say that we're, selling as many games, and certainly not as many copies of any particular game, with the exception of Twilight Struggle, maybe, as they did back in 1980. But we're doing pretty decent as a hobby. Yes, we have a graying population. Yes, that is a concern. Yes, we should be trying to bring more new people in. That's great. But really, you guys, the hobby's going to outlive me at this point, so I'm okay. Matt Taylor says there was a gap wargaming in the Midwest in the late 90s and early 2000s. So there was like a bit, wargaming took two huge hits, right? One was the demise of SPI, which there's the Greg Kostikian article about a Farewell to Hexes, I think it's called. Worth your time to read that. He blamed TSR for the demise of wargaming, but as we know now, wargaming proved a little more resilient than Greg thought. And while I don't necessarily disagree with any of the points that he raised in that article, I think in retrospect we see a more complete picture. But another thing that we lost when SPI went away, it was this huge output of war games that were being produced every year until suddenly they weren't. TSR still released some stuff, but certainly they didn't manage anything like the pace that SPI had. They also boned all the S&T subscribers, which was Greg's big problem with that. And again, I don't disagree that was problematic. But then we lost Avalon Hill, right? Avalon Hill got sold off to Hasbro, and the only thing that was really soon extracted from the Hasbro clutches was ASL, that multi-man publishing. Thanks, Kurt, for doing that, if nothing else. And then that slowly developed into a few other things being licensed out by Hasbro. GMT was around, forget the timing now because I haven't looked at the numbers very quickly, but I mean, even at that time, GMT had been around for a few years. But GMT was doing very badly until they implemented their P500 system to kind of guide their production and guarantee a certain amount of sales. Now GMT is the closest thing we have to a dominant company in the industry, which I am completely fine with because I like their output. But we didn't have, we were missing the two big publishers, right? And to see wargaming become much, much less visible in the 10 years after that is completely unsurprising, even just based on those two facts. That we didn't have SPI anymore, and we hadn't for 15 or 17 years. And now we didn't have Avalon Hill anymore. So nobody was, we had small companies like GMT, and GDW was still around. I'd have to look at the timing on this, but I think GDW is still around at the time. And I think GDW continued doing war games more or less until the very end, but it was like a thing a year or so. John Longshore asks, what do I feel would be the best tactical, traveler-ish, tactical planet land game? So tactical, I mean, that Space Infantry might be good. I don't really have any direct experience with it. I played Starship Troopers years and years ago. That's pretty good. There's also Star Soldier from SPI, which I think was probably worth worth a look too. Although of the 3 games in the trilogy, I was the least interested in that. Of the Hex Encounter stuff, that's what springs to mind immediately. Krusty Captain asks, how many wargamers are still out there? A few thousand? I suspect that the number is in the mid to high 5 figures. So I'm going to say upwards of 50,000. It's very difficult to say, and I have no inside information that demonstrates this whatsoever. But certainly the sales of individual titles are nowhere near what they were back in 1980, but we have a lot more individual titles being released now than we did back in 1982, and that's got to be a big factor. Plus, there's also competition for those dollars in the form of other analog games and other types of analog games and video games. I also think, getting back to that point, I don't believe that computer war games have ever truly fulfilled their potential. That's something we can talk about in a future show. Commands, Lead Magnet, that's a good call. Commands and Colors goes in Plano boxes. Me too. I don't buy mine from Plano, but I buy mine from a company called Flambeau, which is here in Ohio. But they're the same type of thing. Plano boxes are the way to go for block games that have a lot of blocks, and those do. Well, so, I whined once about stickering blocks until somebody pointed out you could be painting miniatures instead, and I said, yeah, that's a good point. So there was that. Yes, D&D was released in 1974. I'm just not sure when in 1974 that occurred. The second RPG was released in 1975. Whether you believe that to be Tunnels and Trolls or Empire of the Petal Throne, both were released in 75. Jeff M. mentions that he's bought some games from eBay and is surprised to find that they are unpunched. That's happened to me too, actually. Somebody sent me something that turned out to be in the shrink wrap, and I didn't expect it to be in the shrink wrap. Stigler mentions D&D weenies taking over wargaming conventions in the late 70s. So I was not a convention goer in the late 70s, so I can't comment on that. But certainly when I started going to conventions, I was doing both role-playing games and war games, and honestly, I was doing more role-playing stuff at the conventions, but we did war games locally. But it was never a problem for me. Now, and a few years later, it was collectible card games edging out the RPGs, right? And we've seen a reversal of that lately as well. Jeff M. 75 was a copyright on original box set. That may be the case, but it was released in 74. I'm not sure that the copyright, they may have filed the copyright in 75. That's possible, but it was released in 74. There is an entire universe of blogs and YouTube channels and all that trying to reconstruct that early D&D experience where it was, in fact, just as often passed on verbally or by experience rather than buying the books. That is something that I am not getting into. Matt Taylor says GDW went under in 97, which sounds about right to me. And I don't remember, when did Avalon Hill go away? I forget. I've looked all these numbers up, and I don't remember the specific sequence. Kaiser Bill is playing Starship Troopers currently. Krusty Captain mentions that the Vietnam War took folks out of military war games and into fantasy. That's probably true, but there's probably... Was that bigger than people who had a military experience during the Vietnam War, not all of whom went over to Vietnam, and came back, got out of it and did war games? I mean, I don't know that that was a net drain or not. And I don't suspect that we're going to see actual figures on that. So yeah, that's a good point. Bill Broadhurst mentions that. Well, actually, better. So So Mark Herman's Pacific War. Let's look it up. This is the reprint of Mark Herman's Pacific War on GMT's website. It is well over. I don't know how well over. Top over here. We got to spell Pacific correctly. That would be cool. 2,200. That's the highest pre-order number that, off the top of my head, that I am aware of on a war game. I think that Imperial Struggle was well over that. I think it was over 3,000. But this is, nobody's going to argue with you whether it's a war game or not. It's Pacific War, right? It's the old Pacific War with hexes and tons of counters, 10 counter sheets. Super excited about this, by the way. So right there, that's one game with 2,200 pre-orders. Now, did a couple of people probably order more than one? Sure. A couple of people probably didn't pre-order it yet and will buy it when it comes out and they see it on the shelf because they're like, oh, I didn't know about this. What's the internet? That still happens. I game with some of those people. I don't know how cool the Manila thing is going to be, but it's 6 maps. It's the biggest single historical ASL module that I'm aware of. I guess at least from the publisher, right? I think Critical Hit may have done some bigger ones. Space Infantry seems to be well regarded, and I like Lock and Load a lot as a publisher. I've talked about this before. Unfortunately, most of their output doesn't interest me because so much of it is tactical stuff. I am super interested in the new Trial of Strength, for example, but that seems to be a victim of recurring delays. Does Starship Troopers have a vassal module? Good question. Probably. I bet it does. I mean, I remember D&D, and SPI did this too, and you can find them on YouTube, when these companies had TV commercials. How crazy is that to have a D&D TV commercial? And you used to be able to go get them at Sears, right? Now Sears is a company that barely exists. That's a whole other can of worms. But I did look, not for any reason, but they do have the D&D starter set, the current D&D starter set, and Essentials kit at Target, which I guess is something. I mean, it's nice to see that it's there. I do not need either product. I actually have 2 copies of the starter kit. The adventure in the starter kit is worth the price of the starter kit. A lot of that SPI SneakerNet stuff is showing up on the Vassal website at this point because Decision has lifted the ban on Vassal modules for those games. That said, they didn't lift it universally. There's still a handful of things, including War in Europe, that still applies to because they have licenses supposedly out. I remember my go-to hobby store at when I was a kid was Hobby Center Toys, which was a store at a mall, and they had what would be a stunning collection of role-playing products and war games too. Nowadays, far more than any of the local stores have. Not that every gaming retail. Board games and card games are well supported in the Columbus, Ohio retail market. War games and RPGs are not particularly. Yes, I can go buy D&D products or Pathfinder products and some Call of Cthulhu stuff and some things like that. I can usually go get a recent GMT release, for example. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I could even stumble across something from Compass or Lock and Load or DVG. But you're rolling the dice on that. You're never completely satisfied with the selection that any of the local game stores have. There are still really good game stores for hobby game selection. Just none of them are here. The Gamers Armory in North Carolina is supposed to be really good. I've seen pictures. It looks amazing. There's still a couple Complete Strategists. There's a place in Chicago, the name of which I can't remember, which has a great selection. Children's Palace, I bought, or was bought, the original squad leader from Children's Palace. They didn't have much in the way of role-playing stuff, but they had a lot of Avalon Hill games. at least around here. And, does it say that D&D was a national issue is probably a little bit of an overstatement. But remember, we did have what is now called the Satanic Panic. That was something that I was exposed to very early because one of the local kids was a attendee at some kind of Baptist church where they propagated that literature that contained actual lies about what D&D was and what it was about and what the kids that were, whoever it was, were doing when they were playing it. That was a formative experience for me. Fortunately, that's kind of, it was no joke at the time. It kind of gets laughed off now. We still have a wee bit here going. We're going to have a slightly top this off, and we're going to go with the stream until I finish it. How's that sound? Which is going to be at least another half an hour. I think the target is going to be around 11. We'll see what happens. I appreciate everybody showing up, as usual. And I don't have to worry about the clipper squeaking anymore at this point, because I don't have anything else handy to clip. Burma, OCS Burma showed up. That is, I think, 3 counter sheets. Might be 3 unit counter sheets. I'm not sure. Let's look. One of the things that I have to be concerned about is if I do a live stream, I have to be concerned about other we're at this point now where I have to be concerned about other wargamers live streaming because I don't want to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to say, hey, ID Jester's live streaming at 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I'm not going to live stream then. He's, I don't want to, have a live stream that nobody watches, and I don't want him to suck the blood out of his live stream. So I've kind of staked out Mondays for live streams, and I won't promise to never do anything outside of Mondays, but Monday is my live streaming day, and then if I do a live gameplay, it's going to be Sunday probably. At least for the time being. So there's 1 marker sheet in OCS Burma. Unit density should be pretty low. It's the only game in the Pacific Theater. That is at least until the Luzon game comes out. Turns out the fellow that's the designer of the OCS Luzon game is following me on Twitter and retweets a bunch of my stuff. And I didn't know that because I don't speak Japanese and he doesn't speak English. A local fella has a playtest copy of Luzon on the table at his place. And it looks interesting. It is quite small. It's like not even a full-size map. At least as in its current state. It might end up evolving into something slightly bigger. We have, we could always do an all-nighter, too, at some point. I'd like to do something more than clip counters. I've been clipping counters and organizing Access GB2 counters a lot of the day today. But I also needed a relaxing day. And one of the things that I do to relax is clip counters, frankly. I'll put on some music or some TV thing that on the computer that I don't have to pay a ton of attention to and clip counters. You can find those tracts on the internet. And of course, I remember seeing those at the time. Back in what would have been 82, 83, something like that. Would have been when I saw them. I did that when I streamed on that Traveler stream on Tuesday, which I only did because I didn't have the video done in advance. I'm going to try and get that done in advance this week. And I didn't want to miss the day, and there were like 3 other people streaming at the same time. And I still had, the numbers were fine, but I don't want to, I would like to give other channels that want to do live streams room to breathe on their own too. So, whoever that happens to be. At this point, the only OCS title that I really need, I don't have all of them, but like, where's the wiki? Huba's Pocket, for example, which was the 4th game in the series, is obsolete once Third Winter comes out. Third Winter covers that. Guderian's Blitzkrieg was redone, which I have. Enemy at the Gates is part of Case Blue, so I have that. Tunisia was redone as Tunisia 2, so I have that. Everything else other than Korea since then, I have. And for me, it's always about play value rather than just to collect them all. The only series I have with the idea that some of those things are collectors' things is Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. And honestly, that's only because you can get, at least if you are patient and pay attention, you can, excuse me, you can get those old Avalon Hill ones pretty cheap for the most part. Like the ones that have been redone, Stonewall Jackson's Way, Roads to Gettysburg, Here Come the Rebels, you can get those relatively inexpensively. Kaiser Bill mentions that Gary Gygax was a professing born-again Christian. I don't know if that's an accurate statement. What I can tell you is that Gary was a Jehovah's Witness. So how that falls into born-again Christian, I'm not sure. But, and I think he had to step away because he was starting to catch flack from the Jehovah's Witnesses about being the progenitor of D&D. I don't know that I've mentioned this, but I knew Gary. I played with Gary twice, and I met Gary in person, I think 3 times. And we had done some correspondence back in the days when AOL was the thing. And that was during the Dangerous Journeys era in most of my correspondence. And the play with Gary was around Dangerous Journeys, right? And then the last time I met him was at an Alliance open house some years later where Dangerous Journeys was no more, and he gave me a copy of what was then the new Legendary Adventures RPG. So a lot of people knew Gary better than I did, but I did know Gary and was cordial with him when we ran into each other. Nathan Landrum asks, if he were to buy one Pacific War game, should he choose Empire of the Sun or the upcoming Pacific War from GMT? Boy, that really depends. I will absolutely champion Empire of the Sun as a total masterpiece. But a lot of people will say they're different games. You might want to take a look at a couple of other things. There's a new version of Fire in the Sky coming out. I forget by who. That's a relatively well-regarded Pacific War game. I have heard good things about Pacific Tide from Compass. That is a design by Gregory M. Smith, but it is not a solitaire game or a procedural narrative-driven thing like this with the Hunters. I've heard good things about that. Those are both small, light, area-based, I think, area or point-to-point games. Both Pacific War and Empire of the Sun are hex-based games. Empire of the Sun is a card-driven game. It is unusual to see hex encounter games that are also card-driven. It's not unique, but it's uncommon. Okay. However, Empire of the Sun is, even though it has operations in it and has some operational flavor, it is a strategic game, okay, covering the entire Pacific War. It is a game that its footprint is often overstated. It's sometimes even called a monster game. I don't understand that. It is one map. It is a counter sheet and a half, and you can play it in a long afternoon. If you know what you're doing, right? I mean, if you're new to it, there's a lot going on there, and it's going to take you quite a bit longer. Pacific War is an operational game. It is not, although there is a strategic scenario, it is not particularly well regarded for its strategic scenario. What people like about Pacific War are the operational campaigns. So I think they're both worth having. They're different games. They are showing you different aspects of the Pacific War, and they will happily coexist side by side on my personal shelf. They don't right now because I have the old Pacific War, so it's on the Victory Games shelf, and the new Empire of the Sun, so it's on the GMT Games shelf. It's definitely, I mean, I can't even say that Empire of the Sun is easier to get into, because while that's true, vacuously, it's not a particularly easy game to get into. It's one of those games where the rules aren't that complicated, but you really need somebody to explore it with. It's a hard game to learn solitaire. unless you are ready to consign yourself to always being an inept player of it, because there's a deep layer of strategy behind Empire of the Sun, competent play of Empire of the Sun, to say nothing of masterful play, and there's not a lot of material on that. The best learning tool I've seen for Empire of the Sun is actually a series of vassal files. You should be able to find this on the Board Game Geek page, done by Judd Vance, who's a big champion of the game. Those will kind of like walk you through the turn structure. The rules are not that complicated. Pacific War, on the other hand, is a fairly complicated game. But like seeing how all of the rules work together and turn into a game in which historical things occur is an additional step that you have to take on top of learning the rules. But I have a very high opinion of Empire of the Sun having played it, and I have a pretty high opinion of Pacific War not having played it. The Blue Tweezers is doing playthrough of the Coral Sea scenario, which is one of the operational scenarios from Pacific War right now. I recommend watching that. Anybody subscribed to me should be subscribed to Blue Tweezers' channel. At some point, I'll do a video on other wargamer channels that you should subscribe to, but we have never quite gotten there. Slow Biscuit mentions Flat Top, which is not the whole war, but which is a fantastic game nonetheless. It is a single campaign. You may also keep an eye on Under the Southern Cross or Beneath the Southern Cross, which is coming in a year or 2 or 3 from Compass. That's a retooled flat top system. You also might keep an eye on the new Carrier Battles Philippine Sea from Compass, which is also coming. That actually looks fairly promising as well. Across the Pacific is a game that some people like. I don't know much about it. The other one was that Pacific thing from Quarter Deck. Was it Quarter Deck? I forget. That I sold not that long ago. Or Omega Games. I like Flat Top a ton. I think Flat Top is a really cool game. It has tons of bookkeeping, so if you're not comfortable with that, you're going to hate it. But I don't mind that, and I speak very highly of Flat Top. I think it's a great game. That's another point. So Flat Top was in that flat 1-inch Avalon Hill box, same box as like Wooden Ships and Iron Men. It is absolutely impossible to get punched. It's even if it's unpunched, it's hard to all get back in that box. If it's punched, hopeless. There's no way you're getting it back in that box. Worse, and it's a big game too. It's not like it's a counter sheet where you can baggy it. No way. So yeah, play it on Vassal. Mine came partially punched and with the box miraculously not destroyed. Is another thing that because of that, the boxes tend to not be the lid wouldn't go on the boxes, so the corners would blow. A lot of Mark Herman's games are seems to me, very chess-like. And I mean that in a good way, as somebody that doesn't particularly like chess. Mark's games tend to be like that. And Mark is like a proficient or master-level chess player. Is it Chewy Matt? It is Chewy Matt. You're absolutely right. It's not Blue Tweezers. Blue Tweezers is doing the playthrough of The Mission, which is the early Christianity game, which is a fascinating game. That's another one that I am currently watching. It's a lot easier to watch because they're like 8-minute videos as opposed to the 40-minute videos that Chewy Matt is doing. So one of the things that's different about this version of Pacific War is it's going to be like restructured rules. My understanding is there will be relatively few actual changes. Let's see. But it's going to be restructured so that you have like the battle scenarios and the operational scenarios and the campaign scenarios and then the strategic scenarios, and it's all like each thing has its own book. It's a big game, right? It's 9 counter sheets. The original version was 9 or 10 counter sheets, and I think the new one will as well. It's going to be in a 4-inch box with 2 mounted maps and an unmounted map, and it's going to be a deluxe package. It's probably my number 1 most anticipated game of the year. That's probably fair. And I think it will be out this year. I don't have any inside information on that, so don't quote me. But by the way, I do have inside information on OCS Third Winter. It is already starting to push product to the printer for proofing purposes. We should see it around the middle of the year, give or take a month or two. So we're talking Q2, Q3, I think, for Third Winter. So that's best guess, right? But that's, it's better than what we have a lot of the time. I think the operational scale, with the understanding that sometimes you have a strategic game with operational flavor, and sometimes you have an operational game with tactical flavor. Operational is my sweet spot. That's where I like to play the most, which is interesting because when I was into war games back in the day, that wasn't what I was playing. I was playing strategic or tactical stuff. That is very much my sweet spot now. And part of that's OCS, and that we have a vibrant local gaming community dedicated to OCS, but still. Flat Top was originally an S. Craig Taylor design, as I recall. He is no longer with us. He also did Wooden Ships and Iron Men, which is another classic. Eastwind Rain is one I've heard of it. It's kind of got a cool name. I've never played it. Now, John Longshore mentions the Second World War series. That is very much like a low-level operational at that. Especially, I have Singapore. Actually, we almost got me clipping Singapore tonight, which would be me clipping Singapore for the next 10 weeks, because that's about how much is in the box. It's got. I think that system has a significant amount of promise as an evolution of the Europa system. So I would very much like to explore it. It is on the to-do list. We just haven't gotten to it yet. You can sell a sealed copy of Flat Top for a substantial amount of change. I will tell you that. It is a fantastic game, and I'd highly encourage you to play it. JPJ 5010 asks about LOB, by which I assume you mean Line of Battle. I haven't played it lately, but it's a good game series, and I like it quite a bit. We played the Antietam game, None But Heroes, a few years ago, 2 years ago, something like that, and had a lot of fun with it. It's a nice game system. I think I personally, for a variety of reasons, I think I like Great Battles of the American Civil War a little better, but one of those reasons is a lack of desire to go back to the old regimental sub-series, and seeing a better battle selection in Great Battles, like a lot better. The next game in the series, Line of Battle series, will be called No Turning Back, I believe, which will be the Battle of the Wilderness. That is a cool battle that we have seen relatively few games on, actually. And I think will be worthwhile. I have talked to Chip Farr, who is the developer of that, and it's a couple years away, would be my guess. So that's worth... Jim L. asks about to define operational. So operational means that you are... There's a formal definition of this. You are concerned with... Well, you're concerned with logistics is one thing about operational, but a lot of strategic level games are really trying to be operational level games. So the Grumpy Gamer, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate everybody stopping by today. And we're still at 50 people. I know we were above 60 at one point, but then the stream took a dump, so I don't know where that number went. I can check after the fact, and I can look at the analytics and see how many people were in. I can actually do it from here too. We always say how many people, so let's actually explore that. 60 looks like 62, 61 was the maximum, which is pretty good. Especially I see the dip though when the stream crept out. There's a huge ravine in the line chart where OBS crept out on me. I'll have to look at that error that we had. So, we're still going to go for another 20 minutes or so. I have another 2/3 of a finger here to go. Yeah, not a bad dent in that bottle. After that, I'm probably going to bed. I'm excited to see The Wilderness. Like I said, it's a title that we haven't seen very much. I think Great Battles has never... Stigler, correct me if I'm wrong. Has Great Battles of the American Civil War covered The Wilderness? I didn't think so. If they have, it's going to be a very old SPI game. Certainly GMT's series has not handled that. And one of the cool things about the Civil War Brigade series was, at the end anyway, was that they were really doing a lot of those, not necessarily smaller battles even, but some of those battles that we don't see very often, like Malvern Hill and stuff like that. South Mountain, we got a couple of South Mountain games. I mean, Great Battles has covered South Mountain twice, for example. South Mountain? That's not true. Cedar Mountain has been covered twice. South Mountain has been covered once. Stigler, get on that. Get the team on that. We need that. I haven't really been particularly interested in any of the other GMT tactical Civil War treatments. So, the Clash of Giants Civil War, I looked at that and I decided that was not for me. And I don't recall what led me to that decision. Almost nobody has done Chancellorsville, actually. Chancellorsville is not a good battle to simulate at the battle level. Great Campaigns of the American Civil War got away with it because that is an operational series, and you can do some interesting things in Chancellorsville at the operational level, where you are concerned about the maneuver of troops into position for battle. The battle itself was Burnside bashing his face against Lee, and it is not considered a particularly interesting battle to play at the tactical level. Your exact scale, like your unit scale, is going to vary by topic. So when Patrick Mullen and I started doing a Hot Dry Season, he described it to me as an operational game, and I was surprised to see it was a company-level game. You normally associate, for World War II, you associate company-level actions as operational actions. You know, edging in on tactical maybe, but operational actions. But he's right. It's for Vietnam, operational and company is about right. That's the correct pairing there. For Civil War, I think tactical is about a regiment. For Napoleonic, the definitive, for some players anyway, the definitive tactical treatment of Napoleonics is Labatt, and that's a battalion scale. So it depends on the topic. For World War II, which is probably what most people think of, then operational is anywhere from battalion to division. But that can be deceptive too, because, for example, you have Soviet units that tend to be not the same size as the equivalently named units in another army, right? So, like you see East Front games where you have German divisions and Soviet corps. Those two units are about the same size. It's not just that the Germans were awesome, it's that those two Russian divisions were small. So, okay, cool. Good to know that the Wilderness is on a short list. So I know that I think there's going to be another P500 thing for GBACW this year, so I hope it's going to be this year sometime, so I'll be curious to see that. And of course they have Shiloh in the pipeline, which is another shortlisted game for me to see. Into the Woods, which, all deference to the late great Richard Berg, that is a terrible title. It makes me think of Little Red Riding Hood rather than Shiloh, but it was Richard's title of choice, and they are going to, with that title, in deference to his wishes on the matter. So I can understand does not make it an awesome title. But nevertheless, Shiloh is a cool battle and an interesting battle, and it'll be very interesting to see that in a new version of a battle that has not appeared in that series since the late 70s with SPI's Bloody April. Also waiting for Antietam. The Glory series is another series. That's Richard Berg too, actually. Another series that did not particularly interest me. I want to say the Glory series is Brigade level. Please correct me if that's not right. And I think that... Did we just get offline again? No, it doesn't look like it. Looks like our analytics just took another nosedive for some reason. But we're still at... That looked like a hiccup. I think we're okay. Oh, next month. Awesome. That's cool. Now, I don't know. Let me look at... I'll show you that. I'll show you what I see. This is the analytics for the stream. This stream, right? And it's going to be screwed up because we had that thing last night. It's the same stream. But this is where the stream took a crap. OBS crapped out on me. And so you can't trust this number. People probably didn't detach. Here's our top number at 61. And here's where we are right now. Just now, and it corrected itself, there was a huge ravine here at the end of the chat. So I'm glad to see that we're... You know, the chat always keeps working, actually. Even if the stream itself takes a dump. Which is weird. I'm not sure I understand that. I have a really high opinion of, as somebody who plays a lot of Civil War games, because it's a favorite topic of mine now. I have a very high opinion of Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. It's perhaps my favorite game series. I have a very high opinion of Great Battles of the American Civil War. It is very solid and has a great selection of actions you can do. I would really like to see some of those old games come back into print, but that's another issue. I have all of them but the Chickamauga game. And I like Line of Battle. There's some things I like about Line of Battle better. I like the written orders, for example. I think that's a really cool element that we don't have. You can port that rule into Great Battles if you want. Not necessarily as such, but especially if you're doing solitaire to write out the orders. That's kind of a cool sort of RP type element. You could treat it that way, as opposed to like an actual mechanical thing like you have in Line of Battle. But nevertheless, I like that about Line of Battle. I think that Line of Battle has too many gradations of elevation. It is a thing I don't like about the game, and that I think to an unnecessary degree. You can really see it on the Gettysburg map. Now, there's a lot of things to like about that Gettysburg game too. The enormous scenario selection, the spectacular, like best in class designer's notes and play notes. The rule system is very solid, but I don't think you need 20 different elevation levels on the Gettysburg battlefield. I just don't. Great Battles has a much better array of elevation levels. I also like the maps about equally as far as clarity is concerned. I don't think clarity is a problem in Line of Battle, except as regards the elevations. I definitely like the counters better for Great Battles. I think they are better counters that give you more information in an easy-to-read way. And specifically, I am talking about the brigade affiliation, which is denoted by a colored box on the counter. It's much harder. That information is actually on the Line of Battle counter, as I recall, but it's much harder to read. And they're frankly less attractive counters. I like the Dean Essex style maps. I've had plenty of opportunity to get used to it over the years. But I think that the Great Battles maps are more attractive. They're equally usable from an artistic standpoint. And GBACW does have fairly fussy line of sight rules, as Stigler points out. That's completely true. That's not less true of Line of Battle, but you are encouraged in Line of Battle to hand wave at it, presuming that everybody agrees. So, GCACW, I would really like to see the Murfreesboro and Toloma campaigns. I think Toloma specifically is like Rosecrans's triumphant operational feat I would really like to see that because it was a masterfully managed campaign on Rosecrance's part and made Rosecrance look really good, which was then became somewhat disappointing when Murfreesboro happened and way more disappointing when Chickamauga happened. I've heard reasonably good things about Devil's Den. But I have never. It's got a nice box. I mean, that's pretty much the extent, and it's from Avalon Hill, and it's a relatively mid to late period Avalon Hill. That's really the extent of my knowledge about Devil's Den. No, what you use for line of sight are those badge holders that you clip to your belt, and the badge is on like a little elastic line. That's what you use for line of sight. That's what I use for ASL. It's way better than the tiny spools of string. We got about 10 more minutes. I'm going to call this at 11, which is a record late time, by the way. But we're already at a really staggering number of views on this stream, in part because it's already gone for 3 hours. So, yes, the Vassal modules do have a line of sight tool, which is a little fussy to use, but it does work. You just got to get used to it a little bit. As everything with Vassal, just get used to it. And it does totally work. I gotta say, we played last year. We played the Blind Swords system from the one we played was the P Ridge. Was it P Ridge? Yeah, it was P Ridge game from Revolution Games, I think. And I wasn't that crazy about it. There's things I liked about it. Rick Barber maps, which I felt were virtually impossible to actually read. Counters were nice and reasonably attractive, and if you got the physical games, the counters are oversized, which is always nice. It's a chit pull system where you have this sort of floating pool of special action chits that you then can save, but what ends up happening is you just have like a general pool that you like save as like a hand of cards, and it feels like it's either we were doing something wrong, which is totally possible, or I was missing something, or it doesn't really work in a way that made sense to me. The basic mechanics of it are all completely fine, completely serviceable, but I'm not sold on the chit pull mechanic as it specifically applies to those games. And we now have a number of Civil War titles in that series, plus we have the Franco-Prussian War title. Is it the Metz game from GMT? I don't own any Franco-Prussian War things, and I guess the only thing that would tempt me would be maybe the old SPI Franco-Prussian War, but not sure that that's really all that well regarded these days. I have this is actually from the Decision era, though. I have the 7 Years War game, which is, I believe is a Joe Miranda design and always looked pretty good. It's one of those things that I kept during the years where I sold most of my war games off. Not all of them. I'm glad I kept what I did. Disappointed with myself for selling what I sold because a bunch of it has come back, and sometimes it's more expensive now than it was at the time. Sometimes not. Kaiser Bill is totally right. If you're not sure you have a clean shot, you don't. That's absolutely true. So, okay. We're still over 40 people watching, at least according to the stream numbers here. So I would like to mention, we got another few minutes yet, but so if you have last minute questions, ask them now. Or comments, that's fine too. For the People or U.S. Civil War. Boy, they're both good games. I really like For the People. As I've mentioned many times in the past, For the People was the game that sold me personally on the U.S. Civil War as a topic. It's the game that made it interesting to me, so I have an enormous fondness for the people. That said, I really like the U.S. Civil War. And if you haven't seen the stream, somewhat disorganized stream from yesterday, which was our learning stream of U.S. Civil War, we're going to revisit that next week, so stay tuned for that. I'll talk about that in a second. The U.S. Civil War is a very nice game. It's very much well, I don't want to say very much, but it is something of a modernization of the Victory Games Civil War, in a good way, in a mostly good way at least. As we discussed during that stream, I think the leaders on a schedule is a bit unsatisfying, much more unsatisfying than the Victory Games make die rolls to see if leaders get promoted or die. But I like the pacing mechanism a lot better. It's a lot more straightforward. You have less fiddly bits, and I think it does exactly the same thing in providing uncertainty as to who might have the initiative or how many actions you'll actually get to take. Traveler Tuesday. The plan is tomorrow. I'm going to have to film this tomorrow. It's not going to go live at 10 a.m., I can tell you that. Is to do the walkthrough of the Traveler War Games. That video is not made yet. I'm not doing it live. I'll release it on Wednesday if I have to. On Thursday, we're doing an unboxing, which this week is in collaboration with the Armchair Dragoons and their monthly unboxing day. This week's game is Barbarossa Crimea from GMT Games and designer Vance Von Voorhees, so stay tuned for that. We have an unboxing of the MMP stuff that's coming. All three of those. We have an unboxing of Time for Trumpets that's coming, which is a buddy unboxing. We have an unboxing of Rostov 41, which actually might be next week. I haven't scheduled it yet. That's the most sloppy and idiotic unboxing I've ever done. I was dropping the boxes and putting the box upside down, and the dice fell out and I had to get them off the floor, and it was a mess. I'm going to have to fix it in post. There is a U.S. Civil War new edition, which is on P500. It's a beautifully produced game. It's got wonderful counters and art and a beautiful hard-mounted 2-map by Mark Simonich. Great looking product. Honestly, I bought it for its components. It's 2 maps. I've never seen a 2-map mounted game before. And then somewhat later, I spelled Twitch wrong? Really? I'll have to fix that. I'm going to check it now, because otherwise I'm going to forget. That might be a live stream thing, too. That's possible. Thank you for mentioning that. That is the kind of tiny thing that sometimes goes for years without anyone noticing it. I'll mention super briefly that channel numbers are really strong for the last couple of months, and I have a hunch that is because... Oh, you're totally right. I have a strong hunch that is because of these live streams, which seem to be very popular, and I would really like to extend to you my thanks for tuning in and listening to me blather for 2 or 3 hours, as the case may be. My wife also says thank you, because she did not, in fact, have to listen to me blather for these same 3 hours. So that is all good. There is a Twitch channel. I haven't really done much with the Twitch channel anytime recently. I'll check that after we get off of this. There's YouTube channel defaults that... Yep, look at that. All right, that's fixed. Thank you for pointing. That literally has been like that for at least 2 years. So thank you for mentioning that. Instagram. I'm on Instagram. I am, in fact, on Instagram. Presumably there's something... Instagram. Great. Presumably there's a way to upload videos to Instagram, but that's not how I do videos. So the only things that I send up to Instagram are food pictures and pictures of war games that we're playing. So follow me on Instagram. There's a link in the video description. The link is correct, even if the word Instagram is misspelled, because I had presumably drunk about that much before I spelled either of those things. So, all right. I do appreciate it. Wild Turkey 101. Yeah, so I think that's like an underrated thing. I don't know that I'd drink it neat, but on the rocks, I would be delighted to consume Wild Turkey. We are just about out of time. I'm going to give it 2 more minutes so we can actually say that we went to 11, but now is the time to ask last minute stuff. So yeah, the channel's doing real well. I mean, it won't shock anybody to say I'm not exactly burning the bank account down with ad revenue, but it is a number that is going, by pennies, but it is going up on a monthly basis. Views are up by like 15 or 20%. Subscriptions are up. Watch time is up. All the numbers are doing very well, and a lot of it is just regular content, right? I have in the pipeline, I have the Tartar Ditch scenario for Barbarossa Crimea set up, and I just haven't gotten to actually do anything with it yet. It is literally set up and under the board upstairs, and I would like to do some video on it, and we just haven't gotten to it. There's a little thing. Where is it? We're on pace to reach 4,000 subscribers by May if we maintain the current breakneck pace, which is great. I'm also trying to hit more subscribers or more followers on Twitter, by the way. There's a Twitter link in the video description, so check that out. If you're on Twitter, don't get on Twitter just for me, because I don't want people following me that just signed up for Twitter and never look at it again. But like my social media stuff occurs on Twitter to a much greater extent than it does on Facebook or any place else. I'm also posting stuff to MeWe again, if anybody's on there. There's a Wargamers group. So I'd like to thank everybody. We could talk about all of these topics again next week in all the loose time that we have around the main topic. Once again, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate everybody's patience, both last night during the stream that was not a stream and didn't happen, and tonight when the stream went poo-poo in the middle of it. So thanks again, and we'll see everybody again soon.